We are streaming. Now let's see if this comes up on the studio. If it comes up on the studio, then we'll know it's working. Right? Okay. Okay. Think it's working. Think it's working. Okay. Bigger and whale shit. I think we've started. So now I will try and find the link. Okay. We've got the link. All I need to do is hook on this. And everybody upvote, and let's get this started. Alright! Oh my fucking god. That was, so we were cut off, and now let me go around and switch all of the stuff out there, basically kind of get ourselves going. Well, let me test actually. It works. First off, let's see if I can hear myself. And you're going to hear me do this for a few minutes while I adapt to self-production. I mean, there is nobody here with me right now. It's just me. So let's see if I can get this going on my channel, and see if I can hear myself. Gonna go over here. You're gonna hear me do this for a few minutes. Okay, good. There we go. That works. That works. All right. So we know that works, and what I'm going to do. Katerina Love says, "Keep speaking truth, Douglas." Hey, love you, honey. Mwah. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here. This is like, well, you know, it takes its toll, but, you know, keep on going, right? What was that stupid commercial? It takes a licking, but keeps on ticking. Timex watches. Yes, nobody wears watches anymore because now we have cell phones. Of course, you're too young to remember watches. There used to be a time back in the days when dinosaurs roamed the earth that people like me wore timepieces on bands that were wrapped around our wrists. And all right, just gonna put my earbuds on now, just to see if this link takes me to our ongoing live stream, and then gonna see if I can hear myself. And I can hear myself. And it's just Katerina Love and myself at the moment, and someone else gave us an upvote, so we'll be stacking them on soon enough. And this is, of course, I'm pretty spacey right now, but that's cool. That's fine, because I'm just going to rave about yesterday's riots, because when I got cut off, we couldn't let that wait till next week, because there's so many things that are going to happen by next week that it would become quickly all too passe. Just a lot of stuff is going to happen between now and next week. We all know that. So I might as well provide my analysis on the riots right now while we're still here, while we're still in the midst of them, or, you know, immediately afterwards. Just going to bookmark a few things I encounter on YouTube, because I'm compulsive like that. And let's go over to my channel and then get this going. And okay, so we've got this going, we got this going, and I'm producing all by myself. It's like, you know, look, ma, no hands. Just right there. Daniel Roll says, "Erecting analog time will be like code talk in the future, like cursive writing." Yes, oh my god. Don't make me sad, you're depressing me. Okay, now I've got to figure out a way to basically get the links up on my Facebook timelines so that people know that we're operating. So everybody will hear me talk to myself while I deal with that challenge. So let's figure this out, and you'll hear nothing constructive for several moments. Alright, let me try going to the Sora AUI timeline and getting this up here. Okay, YouTube, and this hopefully brings up our screenshot. Good, and with that, we'll get the text in there and see what we can do to get ourselves on track. Okay. Breathe. And I gotta remind myself to breathe. Okay, there we are. And get this going down here. And then get this going here. And then we'll at least get the hyperlinks functioning so that we can make certain that everything works just right the way it should. Alright, let's hope this works. Cross ourselves. Knock on wood. Here we are. There we go. And let's test this out. See if this works. Okay, and see if this takes me to the right place. And I'll know when I get there. Yes, we're in the right place. Holy shit. Can't believe it. Okay, so at least that's working out, right? I can produce by myself. Soon I won't need anybody. You'll hear me all alone. And like Robinson Crusoe. We don't want that. And okay, so wow, somebody just put a 1 on that already? Oh no. Okay, gotta put that up to the top. Pin to the top of the page. There we are. Good. Refresh that page, and we'll be set. And then the other page. Okay. And it is Christmas Eve in Eastern Christendom. It is, what? No, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day in Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Russia, all of the Byzantine Orthodox heritage nations. So, Christos se rodi, Christos be born. It is, there we have that. Merry Christmas. In the Slavic liturgical tradition, or the Greek Orthodox, I forget, Greeks are not Slavs. Romanians aren't necessarily Slavic either. They'll tell you that they're Latin, and they speak a Romance language that is more related to Italian, French, and Espanol. Okay, now let's refresh these pages, and hopefully that'll get us back in the groove, so to speak, back on track. And then I can start raving. Okay, so here we are. Okay, there we go. Wonderful. And okay. Now, if only I had someone to bounce off of, to bounce trivia around with for a few minutes, then I'd be truly set, but we can't have everything. So for right now, everyone is stuck with me puttering for several moments still. Okay, alright, so by now people should realize we were cut off. If you were listening to the other show that we have, you would have concluded that. And it was a royal pain in the ass. We weren't cut off for a very long time. We were really cut off only for a few minutes. But then I had to tend to a bunch of responsibilities at home, and just had to deal with a bunch of other things before, getting back on track. Really wanted to absorb some information about what had happened yesterday. And at this point in time, I absorbed what I needed to know, I feel, and can come back and deliver analysis on that, and then, then we can let the world go to hell in a handbasket before the next time I'm back on, so that I have more to try and contextualize for everybody. This is still an Epiphany-tide transmission. It is, of course, into Byzantine Orthodox Julian calendrical Christmas, whereas on the Gregorian calendar of the Western Church, it is Epiphany. And Epiphany is, of course, celebratory of the date that the Magi, the sage kings, the sagely mages came to coronate the Christ as the Christ. The Christ child, of course, was not the Christ, which is a title until he was coronated, and it took a Chinese invasion of Israel, or the Eastern Roman Empire, the Asian Roman Empire, in the sense that was in the Levantine on the Eastern Mediterranean, into Asia by all geographic standards. It took a Chinese invasion of the Asian Roman Empire, the Oriental side of Eastern Rome, and in what is today's Israel, to coronate the Christ child as the King of the Jews and the King of Kings. And this was done at a period of time that we now acknowledge was around this time of year, or at least we respect it or commemorate it by placing it at this time of year on the 6th of January by Gregorian calendrical standards, and about a week from now by Julian calendrical standards, the older original calendar of Christendom. And by that older original calendar of Christendom, it is now Christmas. So all this may be quite confusing, and I'm just kind of settling into my role of speaking for now. And so we'll spend a few hours talking, and then I'll retreat into slumber for the sunlit hours. And so I'll try and get everything out before the sun rises too high over the horizon line, for the sake of my own health. And aside from that, we seem to be doing all right. And what is it that I feel that I'm missing? Nothing too much else. So I would have to say that I'd best just get started with a kind of promotion for my own needs, which are, I believe, self-evident in light of, well, everything that we're dealing with in terms of the equipment failure, but even though it was of the internet and not of my equipment last night, with last night's transmission. We are now basically dealing with the fact that my internet was cut off for a period of minutes, came right back on, and by that time the Skype call had died. I could have continued streaming, but I was effectively off the internet, so the video essentially uploaded. And there was nothing I could do about it, so I figured I might as well take a break, eat a little, refresh myself a little, and then come back here after reviewing a little bit about what had gone down yesterday, so that I could speak to it more cogently, coherently, even succinctly to a degree, whereas also I could recommend any solutions if they come to mind. Okay, I want to first off start with this wonderful, very precious piece written by Selina Khan, and I'll paraphrase what she wrote. She wrote, "Forever grateful am I to everyone for their donations and contributions. Words simply cannot describe my appreciation / gratitude, but I just wanted to emphasize a little bit about my GoFundMe. As everyone knows by now, the cause of my GoFundMe campaign is that I do need and must change my current YouTube recording studio setting, as in the computer, the headset, and recording devices, lighting fixtures, soundproofing my room, and so on and so forth. Presenting 2 nights a week live transmission unto you, all my beautiful lovers out there." This was written by Selina Khan, and it's just absolutely precious. English is her second language, so it has that ambience to it. To all my beautiful lovers out there, from my city to all around the world, is the only life that I have. Now, she wrote this. I would hope not. And you are all my true motivation for my work, and as indeed all of you are, to a degree. I would be no one without all of you by my side, from the closest to the farthest. Well, in the sense of the observer effect, that is metaphysically true. That is true by the definition of physics, in the sense that, but then again, we get pretty zen with that, and rather solipsist. So we don't want to go too far into the direction of when the tree falls and no one's there to hear it, does it even make a noise? But, okay, now that I've successfully lost ourselves from track, getting us back on subject in the best that I can after I'm pretty fuzzy and, I wouldn't say lightheaded. I ate quite a bit yesterday. Went dead. I did? Holy shit. You're kidding. Maybe just on your side? Can anybody else hear me? Everybody, let me know if you can hear me, okay? Let me know what my sound quality is, because our man, Mr. Moon, says I went dead. Let me see now. Let me see if I can hear myself. Oh, I can't without my earbuds on. Let me see. Get my earbuds on here. Peter Moon says you went silent about a minute ago. Shit. All right. Well, let me see if I can. All right. Let me go over to here and see if I can link up using the latest, and then see if I can hear myself. Okay. Okay. Moon says I went dead. Okay, I'm not dead. I can hear myself. Oh, I can't without my earbuds on. Let me see. Get my earbuds on here. Okay. Peter Moon says you went silent about a minute ago. Shit. All right. Well, let me see if I can. Okay, Daniel Arola says I hear you. Okay, so it's you, Peter. Thank you, Daniel. See if I can hear myself. Bless you. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so it's you, Pete. That was Mr. Moon, his equipment failure on the side of Mr. Moon. So, by the way, I call what his anniversary with his wife, I call that the Mooniversary. And so what did I just do? Just did something where I had the DDD up, but then I have that up twice. Oh, I know what happened, I think. All right, so we've got that. And now let me turn back to my listeners. Peter Moon says, you are now audible again. Okay, thank you, Peter. All right, that's what I'm looking for. Looking for Messenger. Okay, Facebook Messenger. And, okay, so there we are. Went silent about a minute ago. And then he says, I'm audible again. And so there we are. Just give him that. All right. Oh, my God. God, life is hard enough. Okay. So, as I was saying with the lovely Selena Khan, she says basically that you're all my reason for living, and that I would be no one without you. So, whoever you are out there. However, many years of use, all my studio equipment is beyond obsolete by now. Therefore, I have created this GoFundMe fundraising account for donations to update my studio, and this campaign has time limitation. In my case, my GoFundMe campaign, which is entitled Urgent Contribution, will expire in March of this year. At this point, I urge everyone, please, to contribute or become a contributing member of my mission, my work that I do as a public informant, to bring truth to this world, to those who, among you, who are seeking truth. Again, to everyone, I am in dire need of my studio equipment upgrade. Please contribute / donate between now and March of this year, and my blessings be unto all. So there we have that, and with that, understand that when you go to GoFundMe, look up the campaign that's titled Urgent Contribution and subtitled Professional Studio Supplies. And there you'll find that I myself am impacted by both mechanical and psychological injuries that the catastrophically chronic in nature, and for those reasons I'm enrolled in the 250% Working Disabled program, wherein individuals as myself are required by law to work so long as our income is maintained at less than 250% above the federal poverty level, to thereby become eligible for Medi-Cal via paying our monthly premiums based on net countable income until we are 65 years of age, at which point we're allowed to retire. This enables myself to receive the constant medical care that I conditionally require to functionally survive. I've described the conditions before and what I need to survive them, and I don't feel we need to go into that now. And of course, I meet my 250% WDP, or Working Disabled Programmatic requirements, in turn by hosting this bandwidth transmission program, Critical Omissions, which is why I take it seriously. And to continue my work, by which to literally maintain my very life, I must establish a professional grade in-home studio with the latest equipment to meet technological quality standards that will be adaptable to emergent systems technologies as they comest online. So there we have that. And aside from that, very glad to see Norman A. Dillon. I gave a shout out to him yesterday on his birthday, and I do hope that his birthday went fabulously. And, well, that's Nathan Brooks I was talking to. For some reason, I confused Norm A. Dillon and Nathan A. Brooks. I don't know why, but I do. And they're both wonderful gentlemen who have been around listening to myself forever. And a shout out to both of them. And aside from that, because it's, Epiphany and Christmas, my son gave me this wonderful bouquet of flowers, and I love him dearly, of course, love him to death. Aside from that, all right, let's get on with, instead of the season finale of the Trump show, you're fired, it's the treason finale. That would be the best title, the best working title that I can think of for this fiasco. At any rate, Congress has formally validated Joseph Biden's presidential election victory but hours after mob violence interrupted proceedings on a day that saw a time-honored ceremony become a nightmare of unprecedented political terror. Donald Trump's behavior is not only delusional, it is criminal. Trump did not just cross a line, the big red line, in inciting yesterday's riot in the Capitol. He committed a crime. Not all of the crimes committed yesterday can be pinned on the president alone, but the trespassing itself, breaking into the Capitol, is exactly what he called for. First, President Trump denied reality, then he fanned the flames of insurrection. And yesterday, his speech actually broke the law, and he should be prosecuted for it. Trump did not ask people to read between the lines. He was explicit. "You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, and we're going to the Capitol, and we're going to give our Republicans the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country." Now, 4 people that we know of thus far died as Trump supporters occupied the Capitol, our Capitol. 1 woman shot by police, so far as we know, and 3 dying in quote-unquote medical emergencies that I personally, as of yet, know no details of and haven't bothered to look into. I'm sure we will find out more as time goes on. Now, Washington, District of Columbia Police Chief Robert Conte said the dead on Wednesday, but yesterday, included a woman who was shot by the U.S. Capitol Police, meaning they at least are taking responsibility, as well as 3 others who died in these medical emergencies. This is all a sorry spectacle we all knew was coming. What did they think was going to happen? Of course, it came to this. Yesterday was one of the most shameful days in this nation's history. One that was as inevitable as it was frightening. What we saw on Capitol Hill was nothing less than an attempted coup by a dangerous president and an unscrupulous, deluded, and entirely too large fragment of his following, incited to violence by his words and by example. This ramshackle but very real attempt at insurrection was enabled by the president's soulless and despicable allies in Congress, some of whom believest they can ride the wild monster they've unleashed to the Republican nomination in 2024. This is a coup d'etat. Why were experts so reluctant to see it coming? Political science experts have clung to the "it can't happen here" for too long. Yesterday morning, like most mornings, I woke up to the usual round of my political news sites and electronic newsletters. Politico Playbook, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, etc. Much of this coming through to me on my Lifeline supplied cell phone that I am provided free of billing via the California Lifeline services because I am a recipient of both Medicare and Medi-Cal. Now, most of the day's news that I was exposed to upon reanimating after the day before having performed the physical equivalent of a triathlon. Very little exaggeration involved there. I did something incredible in terms of physical exertion. I impress even myself. Honestly, I truly am, like my gang brother Beaver has said, like a cell phone myself, lying on the recharger until I'm needed. Well, yesterday was one of those days when I really had to put myself through the paces, and while I'm normally so sedentary that when the time that I was on my own program with Crystal River and Peter Moon, and I got deathly sick trying to prepare for a colonoscopy, which I now will advocate against with the fervor that many people advocate against vaccines. I became so sick that I turned myself into the emergency room for dehydration. I described just how sedentary my normal lifestyle is to a medical doctoress who was concerned enough that she examined me bodily up and down for bed sores. That's how normally sedentary I am. And yet, I basically went from one end of San Francisco to the other, up and down, north and south, east and west. This is a comparatively small geographic city, which is why it's so congested. And it's all hills. And I did what I had to do and carried a lot of things that I had to carry. And I wasn't even breathing hard by the time that I got home. And then I thought I'd be sore, but I stayed up till late in the night, putting up my promotional banners, etc. And then when I did go to sleep, I slept for a fairly short period of time and woke up refreshed. And I wasn't even cramped or sore. It's just, really, I can't believe it myself. But what I'm capable of has got to be due to my vampiric bloodline, vampires. And, of course, aside from what I was gifted by my late and sainted Cyrus, my womb mate JOAN, my mother, I had, of course, that illegal and still quite regrettable in many ways experiment conducted on myself without my permission concerning nanoplasma. And the combinative of that and the fact that I've gone back to drinking blood some time ago has really rejuvenated myself to a degree that is, well, I'm not functioning like a baseline human, or believe me, there's very few people in the United States who could do what I did yesterday. Well, there's certainly quite a few, probably thousands, but we're talking young men who are physically fit. Your average person my age in the United States, which is over 100 years old, you could not have done that. Peter Moon probably could, but he's physically almost inhumanly fit because he's obsessed with his disciplines of oxygenation. And that's primarily the theme of his life, the breath of life, oxygenation. And so, like I said, yesterday morning when I did wake up refreshed and was going through the paces of filling my brain with incoming stimulus, usually of the political sort, coming in from the outside world, I, of course, was fully expecting what I saw, which was initially most of the day's news concerning the day before's, Tuesday's, runoff elections in Georgia, which, thank the gods of my ancestors, delivered control of the Senate to the Democrats. And we can all cross ourselves and knock on wood in that regard. And, at any rate, other articles concerned the ongoing pandemic and the future of commuting in the post-pandemic world. And one article among them caught my eye, a Washington Post article by David Nakamura. Now, I am usually revolted by most Japanese Americans. What few Japanese Americans there are left, and we went into that in part one of this transmission before I was cut off when I was speaking to Peter Moon about the Japanese Americans and their relegation to unicorn status in North America by the Second World War, and the internment experience, and the majority of them fleeing the United States, quite understandably, aftermath that unforgivable atrocity. And I noticed that most Japanese Americans who are in North America are pretty much house niggers. They just pretty much, like Dr. Michio Kaku, they just really just parrot what they feel the white man wants to hear. And David Nakamura is no exception. His Washington Post article about whether the protests and petitions against the counting of electoral college votes added up to a coup attempt. And his piece quoted several liberal commentators and historians as saying that it obviously was, but the thesis was that what we were beginning to see developing as of the day before yesterday, as of Tuesday, did, quote unquote, in his words, not yet meet the formal academic definition of an attempted coup d'etat. Now, some of the experts quoted in his piece, and I can understand the contempt and skepticism that people have for experts when I review pieces like the one I'm referencing right now. Some of the experts quoted in his piece urged calm and even insinuated that being alarmist about the indications that protesters aim to cause severe unrest could be self-fulfilling. So I filed this and another incident away and set about my daily business of testing and interpreting social formulae about geopolitical history precepts yesterday night's transmission. And as I prepared for transmission but a few hours later, rioters, incited by President Donald Trump, stormed the Capitol building. Now, both the House and the Senate then suspended their counting because of security threats. Shots were reported as fired. A photograph of a rioter occupying the House Speaker's chair, showed that the Capitol was, at that point, essentially occupied, as in occupied by a hostile, invasive force. In this case, home invaders. Produced domestically. Domestic home invaders. Because those Capitol buildings are our home. The home of our government, which represents us. C-SPAN reported that senior members of leadership of the legislative branch were being held, quote unquote, in an undisclosed location. Reporters were refusing to divulge their locations on the grounds, entirely reasonably, that, well, in the, how would I say this? In the condition that doing so would endanger their physical safety, their very lives. And at that point, the National Guard was then mobilized and deployed. So it was undeniable at that point, midday yesterday, the United States witnessed a domestic coup d'etat attempt, a forceful effort to seize power against the legal framework. The president caused the interruption of the process that would certify his removal from office. The mechanics of constitutional government had then, by that point, been suspended. Americans were then in danger of losing constitutional governance to a degree unmatched even during the American Civil War between the states, a period when secession itself did not postpone either the holding of elections or the transition of power between presidents. The moment we faced as Americans yesterday afternoon, high noon in America, in other words, compared far more closely to the August 1991 coup d'etat that attempted to remove President Mikhail Gorbachev from the head of the Soviet Union, or the 1993 armed standoff between Russian President Boris Yeltsin and the Russian legislature. Right up until that moment, an entire chorus of so-called expert voices was telling us not to worry. The past several years have been a boom industry for political scientists who work on topics like coup d'etats and democratic erosion, including several of the experts quoted in the Washington Post piece that I wiped my ass with. Well, if it were pulp paper, I would have done that, but it was electronic and I was getting it over my cell phone. But otherwise, yeah, I would have lined the bottom of a bird cage with it if I had a pet bird. I would have used it to pick up my dog's shit if I had a pet dog. But you get what I'm saying, what it was worth for. Basically, it was cyber shit. As these United States then entered seemingly uncharted democratic waters, journalists and their readers alike decided that standard horse race journalism was not up to the task of interpreting politics. As tensions have risen, however, there has been a profound divide between those who believed that in the end, institutions would save us, that the United States' democratic traditions would be preserved, and those who were clear that we faced a period that could end with a standoff of the magnitude we witnessed less than 24 hours ago. In fact, less than about a dozen hours ago. Partly, there was an admirable devotion to scholarly integrity that my kind, as scholars, had rules about what counted as a coup d'etat. The CSP, the think tank that's known as the Center for Systemic Peace, they codify coup d'etat, or coups d'etat, via their code book. For example, they specify, and I'll flip open their code book here. It's a Department of Defense contracted code book. U.S. citizens aren't privy to this. I stole this from back in the days I was with the DOD. And they codify coups d'etat as social revolutions, victories by oppositional forces in civil wars, and popular uprisings. While they may lead to substantial changes in central authority, are not considered coups d'etat. And until yesterday, true, nothing like that had ever quite happened here. But yesterday's events qualified as an attempted coup d'etat. And that was only by standards of what I was seeing before I reviewed incoming information this morning, before bringing you my comprehensive analysis today. The CSB Codebook, the Center for Systemic Peace Codebook, as contracted by the Department of Defense for Social Engineering Standards, defines a coup d'etat as a forceful seizure of executive authority and office by a dissident/opposition faction within the country's ruling or political elites that results in a substantial change in the executive leadership and the policies of the prior regime. In parentheses, it says, although not necessarily in the nature of regime authority or mode of governance. Well, we were seeing that right then, less than a dozen hours ago, as Trump and his loyalists have consistently sought to thwart the legal casting, counting, and certifying of votes, including by bizarrely attempting to suborn Vice President Mike Pence into choosing the next president. It can be difficult to determine intent with mobs and their instigators, but the organizers of the pro-Trump movements in online forums have been consistent and crystal clear in their desire to overturn the results of the election and maintain Trump in power, as has Trump himself in his own tweets. And no, you don't have to have military involvement to make it a coup d'etat. Although the recent op-ed, that opinion editorial by all 10 living former U.S. defense secretaries warning the military to remain in barracks and support civilian government, suggests that there were and still are very obvious reasons to worry about that. Mostly, however, the optimists' reluctance to see what's in front of their very faces has had less to do with scholarly integrity and more to do with wish casting, making predictions because you want them to be true, not because any of the available evidence supports it. And what Japanese American in his right mind would want a coup d'etat? It is something that I can understand that poor Yellow House nigger who wrote the Washington Post piece that I had reviewed in the morning, his very name, David Nakamura, catching my eye and bringing myself to review his work, I could see why he, of all people, just found the reality around him so alarming that he went into full-blown reality denial mode. For United States political scientists of any ethnicity, Coups and paramilitary political forces are axiomatically things that happen out there. Their study fits in the mainstream of comparative politics, which studies foreigners, not American politics. Except for the small tribe of specialists in American political development who are well aware of the history of violence in this country's political experience. That would include myself and, quite seriously, maybe about a couple dozen other people in all of academia. Until yesterday, Americanists modeled what election outcomes would be, not whether their results would ever matter. Those questions mattered for others. The United States is entering a very dangerous phase. The month-long transition, months-long in the plural, which those aware of how fragile American democracy is tagged as perilous months agone, as I myself did, still has weeks to go. The president remains in power. If there is an inauguration of President-elect Joseph Biden, it will very likely at this point have to be held in a more secure location than the once sacrosanct steps of the Capitol. Almost as incredible as the act itself was the slow-walk law enforcement response, with overwhelmed Capitol police seemingly left to fend for themselves for hours, while hoodlums breached windows and doors, had the run of the House chamber, and the mob outside mingled unmolested, looking more like angry fans after a big game loss than rebels. Imagine the response if these invaders had been black. Actually, one doesn't have to imagine. Think Lafayette Square and the vast show of force that sent peaceful protesters reeling and bloodied so that President Trump could strike his preposterous pose with the Bible. A book that seemed to sear the very flesh from his bones. He held it as if it were radioactive. Yesterday, the insider-in-chief was at it again, and his words found their mark. The man who lost the election by 7 million votes told his ride-or-die fans, "We will never give up. We will never concede." Then he urged them to fight like hell, to save their country, to go to the Capitol to register their displeasure as, inside, Texas Senator Ted Cruz and other seditionists pretended to believe that the election that tossed Trump from office was rigged and that the electoral votes that gave his Joseph Biden a clear victory should not be counted. The white supremacists and conspiracy theorists and thugs obeyed, even as their dear leader retreated to his White House to watch from a safe distance the fullest expression of their devotion unto He. And they were not pretending. They stormed the halls of Congress, carrying the racist flag of the Confederacy, the banner that giveth away their whole game. At one point, they took down an American flag and replaced it with a Trump flag. Never doubt where their loyalties lie. Not now, not ever. They were armed with their own pepper spray, among other weaponry, and they were not afraid to turn it on their former heroes, the police officers whom some of them now denounced as traitors for trying to hold them back. Blue lives matter? Only when it means that black lives don't. The very lawmakers who, but minutes before, had been sacrificing what is left of our democracy to court these, and other Trump cultists now fled from them, as did many others now endangered, simply because they had chosen lives in public service. Some hunkered down in offices with so little protection from the mobs that you had to wonder what the years since 9/11, with all of that grandstanding about the importance of national security and the billions of our taxpayer dollars and freedoms, our freedoms sacrificed therefore, have really been all about. The attack on the Capitol, our capital, was a law enforcement failure. This wasn't a case of too little police, mind you. The Capitol Police, the agency tasked with protecting Congress, is armed with lethal and less lethal weapons and has over 2,000 officers. Instead, it was a serious failure of law enforcement. Angry, violent mobs like the Trump cultists yesterday can make his police seem more necessary than ever. But that's a short-sighted conclusion. On the morning of Congress's vote to certify the 2020 presidential election, President Trump stood outside the White House, spewed lies about voter fraud, and instructed his supporters to go to the Capitol building to aid in the effort to overturn the will of the American people. And an angry mob did just that. They swarmed the Capitol building, clashed with police, and breached both chambers of Congress. The House and the Senate were promptly evacuated, and Vice President Mike Pence, who was presiding over the certification, was escorted out because of threats to his own safety, as were members of Congress, staff, and members of the media. This breach was a stunning display of sedition, an overt attempt by hundreds of civilians to overthrow our federal government. And after seeing it unfold, it might be tempting to conclude that it was an argument for more police, even more militarized police. After all, how did the police allow the protesters to make it that far in the first? The reality, however, is that this was not a case of too little police. The Capitol Police, that agency tasked with protecting our Congress, is armed with military-grade weapons and less than lethal weapons, and is manned by over 2,000 law enforcement agents. So instead, we have here a complete and total failure of the application of that force at hand, a failure in law enforcement. Police agencies across the country are well equipped to quash violent crowds, and that is especially the case in Washington, District of Columbia, home to some of the most secure buildings in this world, and where federal law enforcement agencies have autonomy to patrol the city in addition to local police in an area that is outside all posse comitatus. They are free to kill with impunity within the territory of Washington, District of Columbia, which itself is extraterritorial to these United States. And those cities and police agencies arguest that their large budgets and militarized weapons are justified because they are used to prevent violence. The truth is that they are all too often misused to suppress people's First Amendment rights. Over the summer, Black Lives Matter protesters, who marched mostly peacefully, through the streets of the District of Columbia were met with violent resistance from local police and federal troops. They were tear gassed, shot with rubber bullets, shoved, and beaten. In some cases, police forces deployed military helicopters as a weapon against unarmed civilians. And yet, when pro-Trump, anti-democratic rioters stormed a federal building, when insurrectionists invaded our capital, in other words, they, by all evidence, drew a much tamer response from law enforcement. In one instance, a police officer even posed for photos with some of the insurrectionists. And that's only one incident that immediately comes to mind. There were plenty of other cops taking selfies with the white supremacist rioters before the background of Confederate battle flags. These two kinds of police responses were starkly different examples of complete and total policing failure. One was an overwhelming show of force, an overreaction by law enforcement to citizenry mostly peacefully demanding their rights. And the other was an underprepared police force, which knew for weeks that people planned to stage a massive protest outside the Capitol yesterday, and still failed to effectively barricade the buildings or preemptively request the necessary backup. And though these incidents highlight the unacceptable failures of over-policing and under-policing, both the Black Lives Matter protests and the Capitol insurrection underscore the incompetence that plagues all American police agencies. Angry, violent mobs, like the one that yesterday, can make his police seem more necessary than ever by their manifestation. They might even make his weapons like tear gas and rubber bullets seem reasonable when they do something like successfully breach the Capitol building. But in the end, more officers or more weapons in the hands of incompetent police departments will never make us Americans safer. If the summer protests were any indication, that would actually be far more dangerous. Now, when I myself took the time this morning, thanks to the differences in time zones, to consult a few security experts that I've worked with in the past, they've all concurred that the Capitol riot was not simply a failure in policing or law enforcement. It was a failure of political will. With the United States Capitol overrun yesterday by supporters of President Trump claiming falsely that he had won re-election in November, local security specialists voiced a mixture of shock and outrage as one of the most heavily guarded buildings in the American empire was effectively taken over by angry civilians. Former Boston Police Commissioner Edward F. Davis, who now runs his own private security firm and whose clients have included the Boston Globe, went on record to say the bottom line is the authorities did know what was coming. It's not a security failure, it's a failure of political will to do anything about it. Davis's comments came amid the chaos in Washington, D.C., where the U.S. Capitol went into lockdown with lawmakers inside as violent clashes broke out between supporters of Trump and police following Trump's speech claiming the election had been stolen from himself. Supporters stormed the Capitol, prompting Vice President Mike Pence to reportedly be rushed from the scene and both chambers to recess the Electoral College debate. Video posted by journalists to Twitter showed Trump supporters clashing with law enforcement following Trump's speech, which weaponized them. Trump supporters, weaponized cultists, entered the Capitol building where a joint session was set to formalize President-elect Joe Biden's win, despite objections from some of Trump's Republican allies. Some members of Congress inside the House chamber were told by police to put on gas masks after tear gas was dispersed in the Capitol rotunda after supporters breached the building. By phone, Edward F. Davis, again the former Boston Police Commissioner, said, "This is the most troubling thing I have seen in my entire professional career. I never thought this was possible in this country." And Davis confirmed that typically in such emergencies, any such emergency, the National Guard would have responded. But yesterday, he himself observed the all too evident failure to swiftly deploy our National Guard likely stemmed from the political issues surrounding the election. A Washington Post reporter tweeted around 3:30 p.m. that a defense official had told him the entire D.C. National Guard will be activated today, putting about 1,100 guardsmen on duty tonight. Davis said he himself also believed the same anarchists who've tried previously to turn peaceful demonstrations against police abuse into violent episodes are now riding the coattails of the Trump protesters in the Capitol. With Davis concluding, "You're seeing these anarchists who are simply anti-government no matter what side, so this is really troubling." And he added that if Capitol Police cannot get assistance from the National Guard, the next step would normally be to seek mutual aid from neighboring police departments. And he observed that, judging by the televisual footage, that might have been happening, though it was unclear if the officers were even from neighboring states. Juliette Kayyem, a former Homeland Security official in the Barack Obama administration, who now teaches at Harvard, tweeted yesterday afternoon that she was not yet sure if the National Guard should even be sent in to restore order. With Kayyem so writing, "This isn't payback for Lafayette. Many are dispersing, more police are arriving, it needs to be cleared out by nighttime. Curfew in place, Senate cleared. It is scary, but ratcheting up isn't always best." Now that mention of Lafayette was an apparent reference to the episode last spring when peaceful protesters were pelted with rubber bullets and tear gas to clear a path for Donald Trump to walk from the White House to St. John's Church, where he posed for a photo op holding a Bible across from Lafayette Park. In an earlier tweet yesterday, Kayyem labeled the storming of the Capitol domestic terrorism. She herself tweeting, "This is not a protest. This is not a riot. This is not free speech. This is domestic terrorism. Violence or threat of violence for political and ideological purposes." And Malcolm W. Nance, a former Naval Intelligence and Counterterrorism officer, warned yesterday that the unrest could continue throughout the coming days, and not just inside the Beltway. And Nance, who's authored several books on national security and counterterrorism, so tweeted, "Warning! This massive national security failure at the Capitol could have led to massive hostage situations ending in executions and or deaths. In all uppercase, he said, these stormings will likely occur in Dem state houses, as in Democratic state houses, in the next 24 through 48 hours. Now the photograph of Capitol Police in the House chamber with guns drawn against those on the other side of a barricaded door said it all. The president repeatedly refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power, and here was that refusal made flesh. World leaders decried this sorry spectacle, citing this nation's storied status as an example for the world. That one image made it finally impossible to deny that the light has gone out, the beacon broken. Then camest the inevitable pleas by the very people who'd helped encourage this madness in the first. The elected officials and staffers who refused to shut down Trump's baseless and dangerous claims of electoral fraud before now, who refused to stand up for democracy and the rule of law even as the president took to our supposedly sacred institutions with a sledgehammer. They sent out appeals full of sadness and surprise and "this is not who we are." House Republican cult leader Kevin McCarthy, who jumped with both feet into the effort to stop counting electoral votes, professed to be disappointed. Trump lickspittle Lindsey Graham called the violence repugnant to democracy. The president's own daughter issued, then retracted, a tepid tweet encouraging the terrorists to stand down, whilst calling them American patriots. Ted Cruz joined the appeal, as if he had not himself been feeding the rioters' grievances with an unctuous and offensive speech that very afternoon. Representative Paul Gosar, the Arizona Republican who first raised the objection to counting the electoral votes from Arizona, the result of an election that, by the way, also returned him to office, tried to put the toxic toothpaste he spent years spreading around back into the tube, tweeting, "Let's not get carried away here. I don't want anyone hurt." Of course, the potential was there for him to be hurt at that time. Oh, then he doesn't want anyone to be hurt. Too late for that, Congressman. Voters should have listened to Gosar's own siblings, who begged that he not be sent back to Washington because he was an incompetent and corrupt white trash piece of shit. How could anyone watch these last 5 years and be surprised by any of this? This last half-decade, Trump and his kind have been encouraging just this kind of violent rioting. For over half a decade by now. On to 6 years at this point. Even earlier. Trump could not himself condemn the murderous white supremacists in Charlottesville. Trump's cultists made Kyle Rittenhouse, a man who murdered 2 Black Lives Matter protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a hero. The couple who pulled guns on peaceful protesters in St. Louis spoke at the party's national convention as honored guests. Proud Boys, stand by. Remember? Just stand by. Any member of Congress who professes to be shocked now is either beyond clueless and therefore completely unfit to serve, or lying through their teeth and therefore unfit to serve. We were always headed here. The names of everyone who enabled this president's lies and betrayals should live on in infamy forever. In the face of this expansive cowardice, those Republicans who stood up early and often against Trumpism are all the more heroic, though the group includes a vanishingly small number of leaders beyond Senator Mitt Romney. Romney, who took abuse from Trumpist mobs on his journey to Washington the day before yesterday, Tuesday of this week, called it exactly right as the mayhem erupted. He yelled in the chamber, "This is what you've gotten, guys!" And he later told a New York Times reporter, "This is what the president has caused today, this insurrection." The Republican Party cult is no place for good men like Mitt Romney now. It belongs to men like the president. Men who see the destruction and violence they have unleashed all around them and still cannot bring themselves to give up the absurd but politically electric litany of grievances. What made it happen? Late in the day, Trump issued what was supposed to be an appeal to his mob to stand down. Instead, he fed their anger by continuing to claim the election was stolen and that those on the other side were so bad and so evil. He made it clear that he was one of them. "We love you. You're very special," he said to his rioters. "I know how you feel, but go home." You have to expected him to wink at the end of it. Not even with the eye in his head, but by spreading his orange butt cheeks and winking with his pink eye. That's actually brown. He doesn't have the anal bleaching. That in and of itself, not the one-eyed wink between his butt cheeks, but just what he said about love and special. It was utterly disqualifying. The kind of performance that should prompt his immediate removal from office. America should not have to wait 14 days to be rid of him. And so, a growing number of Democratic lawmakers are calling for President Trump to be ousted from office as of yesterday for inciting a violent mob that stormed our Capitol. Calls quickly mounted on social media for Congress to impeach Trump a second time, or for him to be removed via the 25th Amendment. And Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from Minneapolis, said on Twitter that she is drawing up articles of impeachment. Yesterday she wrote, "Donald John Trump should be impeached by the House of Representatives and removed from office by the United States Senate. We cannot allow him to remain in office. It's a matter of preserving our republic, and we need to fulfill our oath." In the hours that followed, a number of elected officials, they echoed that call. Or, more generally, simply called for Trump to depart the White House. Among them were several Massachusetts lawmakers, including Representative Ayanna Pressley of Boston, a fellow member of the so-called squad of progressive Democratic women with Omar. Pressley tweeted, "Donald John Trump should immediately be impeached by the House of Representatives and removed from office by the United States Senate as soon as Congress reconvenes. This is dangerous and unacceptable." And she later elaborated in statement, saying Trump endangered the lives of members of Congress and staff. In statement, she said, "By actively inciting a violent insurrection, he has endangered the lives of members of Congress and staff and once again demonstrated his contempt for democratic rule of law and the will of the American people." Representative Catherine Clark of Melrose, the fourth-ranking member in the House Democratic Caucus, did not mention impeachment specifically, but said that Trump needs be removed. She's saying, Donald Trump is a traitor to our country and our Constitution. He must be removed from office and prevented from further endangering our country and our people. Rhode Island's Cicilline is now leading the call to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove Donald Trump from office. Representative Seth Moulton of Salem echoed those sentiments on Twitter that Trump needs to go. Moulton saying, Trump is directly responsible for this insurrection and violence. He needs to be removed from office immediately. It is the constitutional responsibility of Vice President Pence and the Cabinet to exercise the power granted them by the 25th Amendment. Now, Section 4 of the 25th Amendment provides for a process by which the Vice President and a majority of the Cabinet can decide the President cannot carry out his duties and install the Vice President in his place. Moulton was joined by Representatives Richard Neal and Senatoress Elizabeth Warren. President-elect Joseph Biden will succeed Donald Trump on the 20th of this month. One unofficial tally, compiled by David Nur, political director of liberal website The Daily Cause, as in KOS, listed about 40 Democratic lawmakers backing impeachment or Trump's removal by the cabinet. Rhode Island Representative David Cicilline, surname spelled Cicilline, was quoted as saying, "This is outrageous, and the president caused it. We should impeach and convict him tomorrow." Some Republicans even joined the push. Vermont Governor Phil Scott said Trump was to blame for yesterday's insurrection and that he should either resign, be removed by the cabinet, or be impeached by Congress. With Scott himself posting on Twitter, "The fabric of our democracy and the principles of our republic are under attack by our president. Enough is enough." Now, the Lincoln Project, a political committee founded by a group of current and former Republican strategists opposed to Donald Trump and his allies, issued statement calling on the House to impeach Trump immediately and the Senate to convict and remove him. Others turned their attention to the role played by Republican lawmakers who had backed Trump's false claims that the election was stolen from him. Freshman Representative Cori Bush, a Missouri Democrat, said she planned to introduce a resolution calling for the expulsion of Republican members of Congress who helped incite what she described as a domestic terror attack. Bush said Republicans who have challenged the results of the 2020 presidential election have broken their sacred oath of office, and she so posted on Twitter a draft of her proposed resolution, which would direct a House ethics panel to investigate whether members of the U.S. House who have sought to overturn the 2020 presidential election have violated their oath of office to uphold the Constitution or the rules of the House of Representatives and should face sanction, including removal from the House of Representatives. Now, as a historian, this is what I can say. This attack on America, yes, this attack on America itself, on the 6th day in January, marks one of this country's darkest days. Trump's white supremacist insurrection overtook the Capitol, and a stunned American empire faces the most serious attempt in its history to overthrow our government, and the enemy is the president. A mob, riled up by a demagogue, storming the seat of government and forcing elected leaders inside to flee is the stuff of the third world. It is how Stalin and Mao Zedong got started. It was never part of the American story until Donald Trump. Until yesterday, the 6th of January, in the 2021st year of our Lord, on the annals of Christendom when thousands of Trump thugs took over the United States Capitol and Congress was counting the votes of Joe Biden's victory. Do not call what happened in Washington a protest. It was a white supremacist insurrection, a seditious attack on democracy itself. This riot was but yet another battle in the American Civil War between the states that has never ended, one that generations of white people have waged through lynchings, murders, intimidation, oppression, odious policies, and systemic racism. This is what President Trump himself, who must be arrested for inciting violence, never mind impeached again, truly wanted. He's never cared about America, and he'd rather watch this nation burn than see it led by anyone else. Of course, the blame for this riot cannot end at the Oval Office. May it forever stain every Republican who refused to acknowledge Joseph Biden as the president-elect. Let it shroud every Republican cultic legislator who turned Trump's loser pity party into a pointless effort to thwart the will of 81 million voters. Speakest with shame the names of the men and women who fought against democracy and tried to pervert voter engagement into voter fraud. They own this horror, each and every single one of them. These sickening images of a nation unmoored should haunt Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell for the rest of his days, every night as he closes his eyes, and as a shrill greeting with the morning light. He can save his sanctimonious, too damn late speeches admonishing the criminal president for whom he has been an ally and an accomplice. McConnell has worn his hypocrisy like a chest full of medals. The monster he helped create, coddle, and feed is devouring America now, live on television. Let him remember that day yesterday none of us will ever forget. Before the Capitol had to be evacuated, and lawmakers barricaded themselves in their offices after security had been breached, Republican cult legislators applauded the first objection to the Electoral College certification. They cheered an attempted coup d'etat within our borders, one they allowed to fester for months with blatant lies about an election Trump soundly lost. And what of the police as this madness ensued? Early on, they were mostly observers, displaying the kind of extraordinary restraint missing every time black people stand up for their constitutional rights. Hell, it's absent when a black woman sleeps in her home or a black man walks down a street. If you don't douse the spark, it explodes into an uncontrollable fire. This is where centuries of accommodating irrational white grievances have left us, staring at a potential future of ash and desolation. Now a stunned American empire is facing the most serious attempt to overthrow its own democracy. Yet the enemy does not hail from a distant land. The violent perpetrators carry American flags, and the terrorist is a white supremacist in the White House. Teach this day of infamy to our children. Teach it so they never forget the depths to which a great democracy can sink when deluded and divided and led by a narcissistic agent of chaos. Teach it so they feel the deep embarrassment, so that they never let it happen again. It was Donald Trump himself who delivered us this day. He delivered us to the edge of the abyss, inviting the crowds, inciting them, feeding them a steady diet of lies and seething grievance about how their nation was being robbed in an elaborate plot ripped from a fever dream to weaponize them as you would in the injection of an effluvia of toxins into a biocidal agent. Then, when the mobs claimed the Capitol, he went silent, letting them run roughshod over the seat of governance. Nigh half a dozen protesters were killed in the ensuing chaos. Finally, speaking for a minute on Twitter hours after the breach, Trump repeated vicious falsehoods about a rigged and stolen election, then finally told his lemmings to go home now. Twitter later removed his video, along with other Trump incitements and lies of the day. The president is, and always was, the insurrectionist in chief. Shame be upon him, and shame on his law-breaking followers. The very same people who claim to revere law and order and loathe anarchy have looted the capital of all the states in union, broken down doors and shattered the glass. They call themselves patriots. Then they spit on the American character. They say it's to make America great again. Then project an image to the world that this great representative republic has fallen into shambles, incapable of peaceful transferal of power. Trump and these cultists, who once took umbrage at being labeled deplorable, are would-be destroyers of democracy itself. Ownership for this deepest disgrace is shared by the House and Senate Republicans who objected to the lawful counting of Biden's Electoral College votes. They deliberately encouraged the fantasy of a stolen vote in states that Trump has lost. The beast that they created does not respond to reason. Even as those lawmakers were debating their nonsensical objection to Arizona's vote, they were forced to evacuate just like their upright Republican cultic and Democratic colleagues when the mob took us over the building, breaching the House and Senate chambers. Trump lost on the 3rd of November. His supporters lost. And now the nation is a risk of being lost. This most noble experiment in self-government of free people, begun by a ragged band of farmers and merchants in 1776, must not end with mobs and police and VIPs, very important persons hustled away to undisclosed secure locations. To explain is how they came up short in state after state after state, the votes counted and recounted and challenges considered and dismissed. Trump cultists needed to concoct a grand conspiracy. And so, digging deeper and deeper into the bowels of the internet, they did. The deep state became the deep nation, with sworn enemies in every corner manufacturing votes. The practice huckster in the White House knowest how this works. Bring out bucket after bucket after bucket of lies, pouring them all out one after the other. The debunkers and fact-checkers will be bamboozled. The furious few will have their false preconceptions confirmed. The lies won't matter because the parallel reality, the dangerous delusion, will be more powerful. 1,000 times no. Joe Biden is president-elect of these United States, duly elected by the people of the 100 states in union to be sworn in on the 20th day of this month. As for Trump, he should be impeached and removed from office immediately. He should be ousted via the 25th Amendment. But with just days left in his term, neither of those things will come as to pass. He must leave the White House on the 20th day this month, standing on his own 2 feet, and if he won't, drag him squealing. Impeach Trump, then arrest him and prosecute him for inciting a riot. Impeach him. Do it by unanimous consent, not tomorrow, not the next day. Yesterday night. Tonight. The U.S. House of Representatives must send the articles of impeachment to the Senate and expel him, then disqualify him from ever holding office again. Once that's done, he can be arrested and charged with sedition and inciting a riot. This is the only appropriate response to the horror show that has unfolded at the United States Capitol but yesterday. Pro-Trump cultists, spurred on by the president's inflammatory words at a rally earlier yesterday, launched a terrorist attack against our United States government. They have breached police lines, broken through windows, entered the Capitol, and overtaken the building. The Confederacy won, or thinks it can. Members of Congress who endorse President Trump's anti-democratic sideshow hail mostly from the former Confederate States of America. Protesters waving Confederate battle flags have been photographed outside the Senate, representing a new and disturbing high-water mark of Southron-personated Copperhead treason. In the Ken Burns documentary about our American Civil War between the states, the historianess Barbara J. Fields had this to say, and I quoted she at length and verbatim. She said, "I think that we need to remember, most of all, is that the Civil War is not over until we, today, have done our part in fighting it, as well as understanding what happened when the Civil War generation fought it. William Faulkner once said that history is not was, it is. And what we need to remember about the American Civil War is that the Civil War between the states is in the present as well as the past. The generation that fought the war, the generation that argued over the definition of the war, the generation that had to pay the price in blood, that had to pay the price in blasted hopes and a future lost, also established a standard that will not mean anything until we have finished the work. You can say there's no such thing as slavery, that we're all citizens. But if we're all citizens, then we have a task to do to make sure that that too is not a joke. If some citizens live in houses and others live on the street, the Civil War is still going on. It's still to be fought, and regrettably, it can still be lost. Alas, the Civil War is finally over 155 years after Appomattox. And the Confederacy won, or still somehow thinks it can. Now, of course, the history books will have to be rewritten, sort of like how the presidents want to rewrite the election results in Georgia and elsewhere. Trump's unhinged, attempted electoral shakedown of the Secretary of State in Georgia was breathtaking in its brazenness and audacity, its genesis and foundation resting entirely on tinfoil hat conspiracy theories. If two dead people who supposedly took a ballot in Georgia withheld their vote from Trump, that merely proves that dead people have more sense than the living, breathing fools who be enabling a dangerous fantasy. At this point, you would have to be either mentally unstable or a traitor to the Constitution to support Trump's madness. Leaving mental competence assessments aside, it'd be indisputable that the majority of members of Congress supporting Trump's attempt to undermine constitutional democracy hail from the states that formed the Confederate States of America. Trump's his congressional confederates, his neo-Confederate lackeys today, would have been Senator Jefferson Davis's lackeys circa 1861, as Davis begged his colleagues to allow the southern states to secede, or the clowns who tried to overturn the presidential election of 1876. That's when Democrats contested the results, holding out until Republicans agreed to halt Reconstruction. That was before the parties flipped into their modern incarnations. Ted Cruz, the Texas senator who once traded gratuitous insults with Donald Trump, but is now among the president's most abject enablers, cited that 1876 election, claiming it gave precedent for congressional Republicans not to recognize Joseph Biden's election. Never has the abuse of history been so misleading. I myself have referenced that election as when a pirate flag was run up both the United and Confederate States of America. Ending Reconstruction was the first major mistake the federal government made in trying to appease traitors. In desperation to save the Union, the northern states bent over backward to reintegrate the rebel states. In so doing, the North, blinded by its own institutional racism, allowed a lesser form of subjugation to continue by another name. Jim Crow left black people at the mercy of bigoted traitors, enabled by a northern establishment intent on letting the South do whatever it wanted as long as it remained part of the Union. The southern states maintained social and economic apartheid, abusing the ballot and the noose to deprive black people of their right to vote and their very right to live. We are paying the price for that Faustian bargain to this very day, siding with traitors instead of the descendants of slaves whose bondage represented the core root of, well, the core rot of not just the Confederacy, but of these United States. Re-engagement and reintegration with the Union were always cynical and conditional. The Confederate States thumbed their nose at the federal government, except when it came as to taking handouts. They are, to this day, the biggest welfare clients in the fucking Union. The federal government was so determined to have huge military bases throughout the South that it allowed them to be named after traitors. Bragg, Hood, Benning. The list of Confederates goeth on. The Confederated States voted solidly Democratic for nearly a century to punish the party of Lincoln for ending slavery and their way of life. About halfway through this last 20th century, into which I myself was born, once it became as clear Democrats were determined to legislate civil rights for black people, those Confederate states became solidly Republican. With hindsight, it'd be easy to criticize the decisions that Lincoln and his successors made to restore and maintain our Union. But history shows, and yesterday's Congressional Clown Show reaffirms, that successive federal governments made the wrong choice. Now it's time to choose right. It is supremely ironic that the rump of the Confederacy has found its savior in that quintessential Yankee carpetbagger, Donald John Trump, a New Yorker who loathes the United States Constitution as much as they do. Thusly, but yesterday did rioters roam freely in the halls of Congress, taking selfies while seated in the Speaker of the House's chair and the rostrum of the U.S. Senate. Guns were drawn on the House floor. Tear gas was fired off in the rotunda of the Capitol. Multiple Capitol police officers have been injured. And most certainly one woman died after being shot inside the Capitol itself. And there be reports of pipe bombs found near the Capitol and at the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee. These are not protests. This be insurrection. And it's one that the president made possible. Just hours before this insurrection began, Trump spracketh to his supporters on the National Mall and directed them to head to Capitol Hill after this, we're going to walk down there, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We will never give up. We will never concede. It will never happen. You don't concede when there's death involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore. We will not let them silence your voices. We're not going to let it happen. His cultists took his words to heart. And only the most besotted Trump cultist would see this for something other than it is. A call to arms and a call to violence. As the violence unfolded, President Law and Order stayed at the White House and offered tepid calls for order, apparently content to let his cultists riot in his name. Later, he put out a recorded video complaining once again about a fraudulent election that wasn't fraudulent, and calling the armed mobs who invaded the Capitol special people, like special education. But people who were totally uneducated, making them extra special. Trump can no more criticize those who love him than he can take responsibility for his own actions. Even before taking office, this president surrendered any moral claim to the presidency. In office, he has committed innumerable abuses of power and corrupt acts. That such a man could ever hold the nation's highest office has placed a permanent stain on the presidency and the American empire itself. For too long, we have become inured to his loathsome behavior, seemingly content in the belief, at least since Election Day, that he will be leaving the national stage soon enough. But 14 days is too long to wait. Trump needs to be removed now, before he can inflict even more harm on this nation. Beyond that, a president who instigates violence against a co-equal branch of government and tries to steal an election needs to be removed on general principle. There be no room for compromise or accommodation with any elected official who does that. Moreover, all those who enabled his madness, Senators Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, Marcia Blackburn and James Lankford, the House members who objected to the certification of Joe Biden's victory, should all be called on to resign their seats. They no longer have a place in our public life. The President-elect spraketh in the midst of the violence and reminded us that we need to heal our divisions and move together as one. But that means excising from public life those who have worked so hard to divide us. Today, we must start with a clear and present national security threat at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Trump must be sent packing, and it must happen now. And if irredentist neo-Confederates like Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri don't want to live in a constitutional republic, by all means, let's grant their wish. To paraphrase the great philosopher Elsa, let them go. And everybody connected in any way with Trumpism must instantly put as many miles of distance as possible between themselves and this president and the mob that he raised and unleashed. In that sense, good on Charlie Baker. The governor of Massachusetts called Wednesday's planned putsch in Washington by his fellow Republicans what it is, an affront to democracy. There is still hope that the word Republican can be wrenched back from the thugs and insurrectionists. And the new majority in the House and Senate should act fast to offer Republicans the chance to return to faith in the Constitution they themselves have attacked. Schedule an impeachment vote for this very day today. through tonight. Stay till dawn tomorrow. Do whatever be necessary. Avert any potential for martial law. Deny Trump command of our military. Withdraw the nuclear codes. Don't wait until the next crossed red line, until the next smashed barrier, until the next putsch attempt. Install Mike Pence right away as the 46th president and work with him to manage the transition on the 20th of this month to Joseph Biden as the 47th. Bar Trump from ever again holding office and get ready to prosecute him for his crimes on the 21st of January. Act now! And everyone who acts now, even those who were most in the wrong until now, can share the credit and recognition as a protector of the Constitution. There be no time for delay. Remove this treasonous president. Invite his own party to join the effort to remove him now, or to share now and forever Trump's guilt for American carnage. Republicans should not be surprised that a dangerous monster was unleashed on the Capitol. They created it. Why did ye form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? That's what the reviled creation asks Dr. Victor von Frankenstein in Mary Shelley's classic novel. But it's also what the angry mob of thousands who stormed the U.S. Capitol in insurrection yesterday could well ask soon-to-be former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other congressional Republicans who fled the House chamber. It should have come as no surprise to those members of Congress, or to the Capitol Police for that matter, when, following the cues of the president himself, thugs who brandished symbols of the Confederacy and Trump's presidential campaigns breached the barricades protecting the Capitol to stop Congress from voting to certify the results of the November election, forcing an evacuation of elected officials. Now everyone in Washington is horrified. Ivanka Trump has deleted her tweet calling the armed thugs American patriots. America won't wipe the slate clean as easily as she cleaned up her Twitter profile. At moments like this, it's always worth asking whether political Washington is embarrassed by an event or truly ashamed thereof. If we be so ashamed that we be determined for this to never, ever happen again, we will finally and honestly account for exactly how we got here. We will wrestle with the reality that in 2012, when Trump was merely the first birther, Republicans coveted Trump's endorsement. We will struggle with the shame of the last 4 years when so many who knew better never did better. For every time that those who laughed behind President Trump's back publicly egged on his supporters and enabled he and his lies. In his debate with now President-elect Joe Biden, Donald Trump told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. After he lost an election in a landslide, he called the results a fraud. He said over and over again that it was a stolen election, including at their rally yesterday on the National Mall. He incited his base in Congress, a fifth of the Republican caucus, to object to the certified results they knew to be legitimate. And they did! If the Senate is truly ashamed of what happened yesterday, senators will expel their colleagues who so demagogically, cowardly lied to the American people and objected to the certification of the people's own mandate. There isn't a big enough mirror to hold up to see the reflection of all those who brought us to this point. We should all be repulsed by those who stormed the Senate floor and forced the evacuation of the Vice President, but we can save our greatest anger for those in Congress who convinced them they were fighting for something besides a dangerous lie. How dare House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy say, "Help is needed," during the insurrection yesterday when he validated Trump's lies about electoral fraud for weeks. These crowds will eventually disperse. The glass will be swept up. The windows and doors will be repaired. But what broke on the 6th of January in America will not so easily be restored. Our leaders will have to decide whether yesterday was the end of something ugly or the beginning of something unimaginable. They have that power. But for today, all I can do is mourn the assault on a place where all of us should feel at home. Once a beacon to democracies around the world, all the states in union are now constituent a republic whose own president has triggered an attempted coup d'etat, broadcast for all the world to watch. One member of his weaponized mob was fatally shot in the fracas that ensued. The Republicans who stood by silently, or worse, who supported Trump's delusions vocally, must once and for all be declared the co-inventors of the chaos that has rained down on the Capitol and be forced to pay the political price. By the time the mob descended, of course, McConnell and Vice President Mike Pence had decided to no longer stand in the way of acknowledging Joe Biden's victory. But it was too little too late. For the 8 weeks that the outcome of this election has been clear, they and hundreds of other Republicans in Congress and across the country have been complicit in allowing the president to spread conspiracy theories about a stolen election like wildfire and to stoke the egregious acts of extremists interrupting these proceedings of the U.S. government in an effort to help him illegally and illegitimately cling to power. More than 140 Republican cult representatives and at least 14 senators came as to what should have been a ceremonial blessing of the Electoral College's official tally from December, ready to voice objections to swing states' legitimate electoral counts, a direct affront to the will of voters in those states. Their disputations with state elections and accusations of fraud had no basis in fact, amounting to little more than a craven coddling of the Trump cultists who constitute their political base. But it's the coddling of Trump himself by Republicans, dating back more than 4 years, that truly created this monster. They looked the other way as Trump courted white supremacists and encouraged vigilante violence in the streets, even as he threatened to send in the military to quell peaceful protests. They stayed silent for months as he lied about mail-in ballots, made baseless accusations of electoral fraud, and discredited the most basic functions of our democracy. They failed to remove him from office after his abuses of power were substantiated in the House impeachment trial. It'd be little wonder that countless Americans do not accept the results of a legitimate election because Trump says it wasn't not won. As congressional actions were suspended, the chambers evacuated, and law enforcement dispatched to forcibly remove the mob, the tide turned in the U.S. Senate with the victories of Jon Ossoff and the Reverend Raphael Warnock in their Senate runoff races in Georgia, shifting the party balance in the upper chamber to 50-50, deposing Mitch McConnell from his capricious and anti-democratic reign of terror. It'd be fitting that voters delivered the Republican leadership this blow, given that what the Republican Party cult has done is nothing short of attempting to invalidate votes and prevent people's voices from being heard. The best route to justice and to restoration of our democracy would be if every elected official who has enabled Trump and his campaign to disenfranchise voters and cling to power were punished with haste at the ballot box. Trump himself lost everything for the Republicans. In 4 years, Trump has led the Republican Party cult from unified control of Washington into the wilderness. On the 16th day in May of the 2016th day in our year in our Lord, by the annals of Christian chronometry, Senatoress Lindsey Graham tweeted, "If we nominate Trump, we will get destroyed, and we will deserve it." The South Carolinians' prediction did not age well at first. Come as January of 2017, the Republican Party cult was in the catbird seat. With Trump's upset win over the Democratic candidate Hillary Rodham Clinton, it controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Trump would immediately be able to appoint a Supreme Court justice, too, giving Republican cult appointees an edge on the High Court. Trump seemed to have cleared out the last vestiges of the Democrats' New Deal coalition and built a new party that might withstand demographic changes expected to favor liberals. Graham, meanwhile, had a change of heart and became one of Trump's noisiest cheerleaders and closest allies. Since then, the Republicans have lost nearly everything. Backlash to the Trump cost the Red Party control of the House in 2018, sending Nancy Pelosi back to the speakership, and Paul Ryan, once seen as the future of the Republican Party cult, off to retirement and corporate board service. 12 years later, Trump himself lost the presidency, becoming the first one-term president in 30 years and only the third in a century. And now Republicans have lost control of the Senate after going 0 for 2 in runoffs in Georgia, which was once a reliably red state before Donald Trump. Its Republican senators, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, tried to embrace Trump-style populist-personated elitism, but failed to replicate the president's results. The state of affairs this morning, as Republican members of Congress mount one more, most certainly doomed attempt to overturn the election, is a big turnaround not only from 4 years agone, but even from 2 months ago. In the days after the 3rd of November, the election seemed like an underwhelming win for Democrats. No major outlets had yet called the presidency for Joe Biden, though he seemed on track to win. Democrats had lost ground in the House and failed to win several Senate races that would have given them control of the chamber. Since then, it has become as clear that Biden won, and did so with a commanding lead in both the Electoral College. When Trump won by the same margin, he himself called it, unconvincingly, a landslide, and the popular vote, wherein Biden won 7 million more votes than Donald Trump. With the Right Reverend Raphael Warnock beating Loeffler, and John Ossoff thereafter beating Perdue, the Democrats have salvaged control of the Senate. The balance in the chamber will be 50-50, meaning Vice Presidentress Kamala Harris can break tied votes. Biden's legislative agenda will have a narrow path through the Senate, but it will have one. So will his appointees to the executive branch and the federal branch. Nothing in politics happens for a single reason, but you don't have to stretch to connect all of these Republican cultic setbacks to Donald John Trump himself. The president said that the 2018 midterms were a referendum about me. And while his cultists don't seem to have taken that to heart, his detractors most certainly have. A huge wave of voters carried the Democrats to victory as the party made new inroads with suburban voters, especially college-educated white women. who didn't like being grabbed by the pussy. The 2020 election was explicitly a referendum on Donald Trump, and although the tallies were close in some states, the overall result was not. For evidence of how toxic Trump's brand actually be, consider how many Republicans down ballot in both congressional and state legislative races ran ahead of him. Nonetheless, Trump insisted on making the Georgia Senate runoffs about him too. The effect was disastrous. Democrats, especially black voters, turned out in astonishing numbers. Suburban voters continued to reject the Donald Trump, and Republican turnout fell short, perhaps in part because the president himself had spent weeks telling his supporters that the state's elections were rigged. The results in the November and January elections underscore the peril that Trump leaves behind for the Republican Party cult. In both 2016 and 2020, Trump's magic was his ability to turn out voters who either don't always vote or have historically voted Democratic, especially white trash, non-college educated shit voters, as in shit bloggers or shit posters. Trump's vote was the shit vote. And that was enough to put him over the top in 2016 on a swelling tide of sewage, and enough to create a scare for Biden and the pollsters in 2020. But there are three problems with this approach of shit tsunami. First, the shit tsunami wasn't enough to give his Trump a win in 2020. Second, the shit voters don't appear to come out in the same numbers when Trump himself is not on the ballot. Third, Trump creates a backlash effect, even without him on the ballot. The night before last, black voters turned out in droves, and white suburban voters didn't come home to the red Republican insurgency on our shores. In short, Trump has broken the old Republican coalition, perhaps irrevocably, and created a new one that apparently exists only when he himself be up for election. The conservative personated reactionary edge on the Supreme Court and other federal courts will continuist for years, or more likely decades, which is a rich consolation prize for the Republicans. Trump has managed to advance many Republican cultic causes during his 4 years in office, though he's done much less than he might have had he governed more competently. But in 4 years, Trump has led the Republican Party cult from unified control of Washington into the wilderness. Lindsey Graham was right after all. He was just premature in his ejaculation. Trump and his heirs still dream of endless victory by falsely insisting that he won. The defeated president leaves a blueprint for the Republican Party cult's future. If you can spare an hour, do listen to the full tape of the conversation between the President of these United States, Donald Trump, and Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. Honestly, it's one of those experiences, of course, that will push your tolerance to the limit. But it's one of those necessary evils that you'll need to just suck up in order to, well, get to where you can understand or comprehend what we're dealing with now. And that, of course, be my intention when I educate yourselves and bring such realities into your world so that you can better understand what's happening to us all from a perspective in context of a history that has led us to where we are. Whichever adjective you use to describe Donald Trump. Delusional, demented, narcissistic. The recording to which I'm referring you shows that he be unwell. His grip on reality is loose. He is by turns insulting. They're going around playing you and laughing at you behind your back, Brad. Whether you know it or not, they're laughing at you. And wheedling. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break. And threatening. You know what they did, and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. He has weirdly specific, made-up numbers. He cites stories of fraud that have been thoroughly deconstructed. He never explained as to why the people who allegedly stole the presidential election didn't steal the 2 Senate seats in Georgia while they were at it. He'd be unable to face the fact that he has so comprehensively lost. He's grasping at conspiracy theories that offer him a false vision of the future. And yet he sounds completely convinced that they be true. Since Trump won the Republican nomination in 2016, Americans have heard a lot of discussion about what exactly Trumpism is. Is it the anti-foreign wars, anti-immigration, anti-Wall Street economic populism Trump campaigned upon? Is it the nativist national conservatism some enthusiasts invented, post hoc, to rationalize his election? Does it imply a draining of the swamp, a move to rid the Capitol of lobbyists and sycophants? Had it been any of these things at all, Trumpism might have presented a problem for small government libertarian Republicans with their tight network of funders and their close ties to business. It might have been anathema to Democrats and progressives. It would not, however, necessarily have presented a problem for democracy itself, the American political system, or the rule of law. As it turned out, Trumpism has nothing to do with economics, nothing to do with foreign policy, nothing to do with lobbyists or the business of government at all. The true nature of Trump's ideology lies elsewhere, in the construction of alternative realities that make us Trump an eternal winner, even in situations where, objectively speaking, he has so monumentally lost. His slogan isn't America first, in other words, but Trump first, always, and above all else. The appeal of this ideology is not economic or material, but rather psychological. Millions seem to be convinced that when Trump wins, they win too. He pumped money into the economy, created the biggest deficit in American history, burdened industry with tariffs, and goosed the stock market while small business went bankrupt. And millions of Americans believed this was brilliant economic policy. Trump staged a flashy meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, signed absolutely nothing, and achieved no arms control. And millions of Americans believe this was a diplomatic success. Trump botched the coronavirus response to such an extraordinary degree that the United States of America, a biomedical superpower, has had one of the highest death rates in the world. And yet millions of Americans still believest him when he says the virus is just going to disappear. As the rest of the public is now learning, this form of Trumpism does indeed represent a life and death challenge for democracy and the rule of law, for it allows true believers to ignore uncomfortable facts, including the fact of a lost election. Look at the behavior over the past few days of the most ardent Trump cultists. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, the Republican attorneys Cleta Mitchell and Kurt Hilbert, Senators Marsha Blackburn, Ron Johnson, John Kennedy, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and others, Representative Louis Gohmert, and Arizona Republican cult chair Kelly Ward. These are people who have consciously, deliberately abandoned our political system of nearly 2.5 centuries in order to declare that Congress, not the Electoral College, and not the voters, has the right to choose our president. That conspiracy theories invented and promoted by the president himself deserve to be heard and repeated. That rules can be changed at the last minute to accommodate the whims of the White House. The Trump cult's Republican opponents, by contrast, are distinguished not by any particular economic creed, but by their commitment to abiding by actual electoral results. Among these Republicans are Georgia's Secretary of State and his General Counsel, Ryan Germany, both of whom gently but firmly pushed back against the president on that phone call. Raffensperger saying, "Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong." A whole host of election officials in other disputed states, some members of Congress and the Senate, including Mitt Romney, Ben Sasse, Pat Toomey, Lisa Murkowski, and Liz Cheney, and former House Speaker Paul Ryan. All 10 living secretaries of defense, including Dick Cheney, of all people, Donald Rumsfeld, and James Mattis, have also called for an orderly transition of power, a statement that wouldn't have been made if they did not believe it was necessary. All of these people remain loyal, not just to the constitutional system that has been in place since 1789, but also to a fact-based version of consensus reality rather than a Trump cultic version of anti-reality. Indeed, by leaking the tape of the phone call, Raffensperger, or a member of his entourage, was signaling loyalty to that old system. In other times and places, when the war ends or the revolution starts, this is the sort of thing people do to demonstrate which side they be on. Once Trump himself be gone, what happens to Trump cultism? Trumpism, as an ideology, as rather a psychological pathology? Well, this week, we've been getting a glimpse of that as well. At least 2 of the Trump cult standard bearers, Hawley and Cruz, have a firm grasp on the constitutional implications of what they be doing. Both, as it happens, are card-carrying members of the American elite. Hawley is a graduate of Yale Law School, a former clerk for the Chief Justice, and a former Attorney General of Missouri. Cruz is a graduate of Harvard Law School and a former Solicitor General of Texas. Trumpism has no real problem with elite education. Trump himself prefers people who have been to good universities. But mentioning Hawley's and Cruz's credentials be important because they establish that both white men are well read in constitutional law, and that both therefore realize they be acting in support of an unconstitutional, extremist coup d'etat. But both have also learned the lesson of the past 4 years. A large part of what used to be the Republican electorate will not punish them for this misbehavior. And if it won't punish them for their misbehavior, then we have to conclude that it too is no longer interested in preserving American democracy. The same large part of what used to be the Republican electorate, whatever it used to believe or claimed to believe, is now just as addicted instead to the false creed of winning as the president himself is, whether in a battle with Joseph Biden or the coronavirus, as the president himself is. What matters to them and their president is claiming victory, owning the libs, feeling cheerful because you beat your opponent. Now matters more to them than economic progress, decent health care, or American democracy. The slogan, "Make America Great Again," and the right to wear it on a jaunty hat matter more than actually making America great. Trump identified this part of the electorate, encouraged it, and grew it with the help of Fox News, a foreign propaganda machine based in Australia, and a host of other conspiratorial alternative reality media sites. Now Cruz, Hawley, and probably others, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Vice President Mike Pence, hope to make use of it too. Why is Pompeo ignoring the president's assault on the election, and instead tweeting a list of his supposed achievements? Why has Pence gone silent in the face of the most extreme challenge to the American political system in generations? The winner of the race to succeed Donald Trump within the Republican Party, assuming it does not turn out to be Trump himself, will not be the politician who produces the most populist economic policies, who promotes the interests of the white working class, or who brings home the troops. The winner will not be someone who rescues our weakened democracy, who restores faith in governance, or who builds respect for the courts and Congress. All of these be side issues, irrelevant to the more important contest. For the winner will be the one who can best sustain the fantasy of endless victory. That, not democracy, not prosperity, not freedom, and most certainly not equality, is what Trump cultist voters want. And the race is on. Now, I want everyone to understand Trump's obsession with winning, his desire to make his winning so chronic, so inevitable, that you'll actually get tired of it. This is the madman who is now the personal embodiment of the lost cause. The lost cause marches on from 1861 to now. Futile open rebellion goes back to the Confederacy. Trump will also lose, but will keep on fighting. The South was, by certain measures, never going to win the Civil War. If you go as by certain calculations that are biased, no denial, considering the resources of the North, the moment the first Confederate cannon fired on Fort Sumter, the South's doom was sealed. A week later, the Chicago Tribune ran a very prescient editorial explaining why. And when I filed it at the Presidio military base into our newspaper files, I reviewed it, and it read, "It is a military maxim of modern war that the longest purse wins." That's how the column began that I took notes from, outlining all the North's advantages in manpower, manufacturing, maritime strength, and most of all, money. The little state of Massachusetts can raise more money than Jeff Davis's Confederacy. That's a line from that column, which I wrote down. The conclusion may have been foregone by such measures, but it still took 4 years and 620,000 American lives to play out. And it's still unfolding. The Confederacy may have lost the war, but having won the peace, they never gave up the fight. It's baked-in bigotry, the proud ignorance required to consider another human being your property, that marches on from then to now. Trump flags and Confederate flags are always seen side by side, which befitting since both represent futile rebellions by weaker parts of our country against dominant American principles and governance, manifesting itself plainly in the Trump era. His entire political philosophy being the slaveholder mentality, decked out in new clothes, trying to pass in the 21st century. They even wave the same rebel flag. Kind of a giveaway, really. The lost cause marches on, as we saw yesterday, when Congress faced another ego-stoked rebellion. Donald Trump's insistence that is clearly losing the 2020 presidential election in the chill world of fact could be set aside since he won the race in the steamy Delta swampland between his ears. No way. Not as long as there be Americans, like the Chicagoans rushing to sign up to fight in April of 1861, who are the true nationalists, willing to stand up for democracy. But urged on by the president, Trump cultists have been showing up to protest in Washington ever since the November election. The groups with the Confederate battle flags are ever there, Trump calling for his backers to rally near the White House before invading our capital. But yesterday, the day that Congress met to count the Electoral College votes that gave the win to President-elect Joseph Biden. And while trying to thwart the will of the people, this president has, for the past 2 months, ignored a lethal pandemic raging across the American empire, indeed across the world, but one whose toll over 2 years has matched the civil wars over 4. Aided by Republican politicians in open rebellion to the Constitution and the laws of this country, and millions of Americans who support him because, like the slave-holding South, they have made a fundamental error in judgment. They believest their own self-aggrandizing delusions, convinced their opponents will collapse at the merest touch. Almost exactly 160 years agone, the smaller, weaker South thought it could impose its will on the whole of the country as extant at that time by military force. During the past 4 years, Donald John Trump, who received 10 million fewer votes than his opponents in 2 presidential elections, served not America, but only his fanatical cultic base. Never forget, the Trump administration initially tried to shrug off COVID as a blue state problem. The South expected the northern population to rebel with them against their own government. Like today, their warped worldview was stoked by media. The Chicago Trib, which I was filing along so many other newspapers, editorialized that this preposterous idea has been instilled into their noddles from reading such satanic and Tory sheets as the New York Herald and Chicago Times, which they were led to suppose reflected democratic opinion in the free states. By the way, the Copperhead, meaning the Dixie collaborationist Chicago Times, I hasten to point out, is no relation to the Chicago Tribune. That Chicago Times folded in 1901, the forefather of the Chicago Tribune of today, the Chicago Daily Times, was established circa 1929, decades after the other newspaper I identified did vanish. As a matter of fact, the truly liberal, progressive heir to the Chicago Daily Times is now the Chicago Sun-Times, which we recommended over the Chicago Tribune. The South figured out how, in losing, to win, after a fashion. They waited out the federal troops of Reconstruction, then returned to slavery, barely altered and under a new name, keeping blacks down in economic and legal bondage for 100 years. First, slaves couldn't vote. Then blacks in the South were kept from voting. And today the president tries to bat black votes away, if not for him. The fight continues. In the spring of 1861, the Chicago Tribune called the Southern secession the most senseless and causeless rebellion of all history. Until now. We may have surpassed it with Trump's frantic tearing at our democracy, supported by a cast of cowards and traitors, hailed by the eternally duped. And for what? Lower taxes? A wall? Their fetus friends? An embassy in Jerusalem? I will never understand it. No matter. They're losers. They lost in 1865. They lost in 2020. Evil always loses eventually. Since they continue to fight, desperate to go back to the plantations of their dreams, they'll continue to lose. Not every battle, but their war against the future is futile and doomed, drowned out by the swelling ranks of diversity, of accepting Americans, facing actual problems with courage and candor, dedicated to helping our nation become what she is destined to be. I sigh and shake my head. And I wonder at it all. Daniel Arola brings to my attention that Trump is in Facebook jail right now, or like himself for a few more days. So I can but take some small comfort in that. Of course, we know Facebook brought us here to this point under the diabolic, self-loathing, Jewish diasporic misadministration of Mark Zuckerberg. Now, Trump's mob of losers came as for the lawmakers. A coup d'etat is exactly what Trump was attempting. He got as far as he did because Republican enablers in Congress helped him. And so, in January of 2021, in Washington it came as to pass. After coming for immigrants and others they so hate, President Trump's mob came for the lawmakers, some of whom let a president break the laws of this land. The mob, urged on by Trump himself, stormed the U.S. Capitol as Congress met to carry out its sacred duty under the Constitution to certify the will of the people and finalize the election of President-elect Joe Biden. Finally, a core of Republican lawmakers was standing up for the rule of law, although there were still Trump backers in their midst, including Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, who were willing to thwart it. The debate had just started over a challenge to the votes from Arizona, when thousands of Trump cultists, welding American flags and Trump flags and Confederate flags, broke into the building, smashing windows and creating chaos as they clashed with Capitol Police. The certification vote was called off as Capitol Hill went into lockdown and Vice President Mike Pence was evacuated, as were members of Congress, staff, and journalists. What a sad image to send out to the world. Of course, it was more than sad. It was disgusting. All the more so since it was encouraged by Donald Trump. Holed up in an office with his staff for safety, Republican Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin was asked by CNN what he would tell Trump to do. He said, "Go on Twitter and say, 'It's over. Please go home. I support the people's transition of power. Call it off, Mr. President.'" When asked to describe the scene, Gallagher said he had not seen anything like it since his deployment to Iraq. As Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger of Illinois also told CNN, "This is insane. The press," he said, "would be covering this if it happened in Belarus, White Russia, anywhere else. We would call this a coup d'etat." Now, I'm happy to say that that same Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger now calls for Trump's removal. He says President Trump has become unmoored from reality itself, calling for his removal from office under the 25th Amendment. A coup d'etat is, of course, exactly what Donald Trump was attempting. He got as far as he did because Republican enablers in Congress helped him. When it was clear the mob was out of control, Trump tweeted, "I am asking everyone to remain peaceful. Remember, we are the party of law and order." At that point, his tweet was little more than a sick joke. Later, Trump told his backers, those he called special people as if they were developmentally disabled, which of course they all are. In his video released on Twitter to go home, but still said the election had been stolen from himself. With all that going down, spare me Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's tears. Before the mob got to the Capitol, the outgoing Majority Leader stood up and said, "Our duty is to govern for the greater good." Yet McConnell trampled on the greater good with glee and impunity for each of Trump's miserable 4 years in office. He let Trump get away with an abuse of power that led to his impeachment and should have led to his conviction by the Senate. And that's just the tip of presidential immorality and criminality that Mitch McConnell and his caucus embraced and winked at, all because they feared a mean Trump tweet or the threat of a primary challenger backed by Trump and the will of the mob that finally got to them. It's over now for Trump himself. The death spiral that began when Biden was declared the winner of the presidential election circled through Georgia and ended in Washington. With Trump's vile lies about a stolen election and other crime boss maneuvers to overturn November's result, he ended up suppressing the Republican vote needed to win 2 Senate runoff elections. The outcome makes history. Georgia elected Democrat Raphael Warnock, its first black U.S. Senator, and Democrat Jon Ossoff won the 2nd seat. With the Senate evenly split, power shifts to the Democrats, since under the Constitution, Vice Presidentress Kamala Harris will now have the power to cast the deciding vote in any tie. As these political consequences sink in, Republicans will blame Trump, but they were his accomplices. Very few Republicans in Washington stood up to Trump as he planned his coup d'etat. There was so much cowardice. After Trump's mob came to Washington, maybe Trump's enablers finally realized what their cowardice has cost them and this country. They hitched their wagon to a bomb that finally exploded. It destroyed Trump, and it will destroy them too. But America will survive. Trump's Capitol Hill terrorists affirmed the truth. America may survive, but it must not be restored. It must be rebuilt instead. Not restoration, but dare I say it, reconstruction. And Donald Trump himself is more than an American president. He's an American terrorist. As armed looters tyrannized the United States Capitol yesterday in the name of Donald John Trump, by his invitation, they reflected America's biggest hurdle in ever building a successful democracy: white supremacy. For the whole of his presidency, Trump has preached divisive rhetoric. He was always loading guns and readying his people for war. He said Black Lives Matter activists were disgusting and should be knocked around. He told police not to be too nice. He laughed at jokes about shooting immigrants. He told Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. And just a few weeks ago, he warned us all that the 6th of January would be wild. He called it a protest. It was an attempted coup d'etat. I've seen propaganda where Peter Navarro releases 36-page report alleging election fraud, more than sufficient to swing victory to Trump. A great report by Peter. Statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election. Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. We'll be wild. That's writ by Donald J. Trump himself via Twitter, @RealDonaldTrump, dated the 19th of December in this last year before 2021, the 2020th year of our Lord by Christian chronometry. Even after the mob made its intentions clear, Trump feigned wanting the insurrectionists to go home peacefully whilst justifying their savagery. He continued to perpetuate the myths of voter fraud and a stolen election. He said in his video posted onto Twitter, "This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you and you're very special. You've seen what happens. You've seen the ways others are treated, which are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace." Trump adores violent, armed thugs tearing up the nation's capital and intimidating elected officials, law enforcement, and journalists alike. Of course he does. When they say, "Stop the steal," they mean block the pathways to equity and the possibility of freedom. Trump is complicit in sedition, the very thing Acting Attorney General Jeffrey A. Rosen wanted to charge Black Lives Matter activists with. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, nearly 95% of protests against brutality and racism were nonviolent, yet they were vilified and framed as destructive. They were met with heavily militarized law enforcement and militia alike. Will Acting Attorney Rosen hold Trump accountable with the same level of aggression or pretend his violent followers acted on their own? Had black folk showed up on Capitol Hill, armed and stormed the building, they'd be dead. There would have been a militarized strategy waiting for them in the District of Columbia. But because this was a Trump cult rally, security was slowly reactive instead of proactive. It was not a failure of policing. It was the original function of policing in action: protecting white power. Think about it. 87 protesters were arrested for sitting peacefully on the lawn of Kentucky's Attorney General in the name of Breonna Taylor. There have only been about 45 arrests related to Trump's calls to action since the day before yesterday, and 30 of them have been curfew violations. That is not Trump's doing. He is not the sole cause of America's tragic truth finally tearing away the facade of freedom and hope. Some 74 million people voted for him, nearly half the country supporting his definition of patriotism and American misvalues. We didn't easily win the presidential election or the Georgia Senate runoffs. Those victories were the result of warring against voter suppression and white supremacy. A fair election required a fight. Democracy was always under attack. The American condition has always clung to whiteness as the symbol of citizenship in this country. When Dred Scott, who was born into slavery, sought emancipation after living in a free state circa 1857, he was denied. The court decided no black person, free or slave, could claim United States citizenship. And it's our country's original premise of citizenship that Trump believest in. This is why he told radical left congresswomen like Ayanna Presley, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar to go back to their countries despite each of them being American. We have always had to fight for the right to stand on this ground, even though our ancestors tilled its soil. Our country's true perilous fight is against itself, against a nation that leaves Jacob Blake paralyzed while his shooters walk free, that raises millions in bail money for Kyle Rittenhouse, celebrated as a patriot for killing 2 protesters against police brutality. The need to make whiteness an identity of status and power is sewn into the country's foundation. Things like racial sensitivity training, critical race theory, and, a fair election and true democracy enrage a certain kind of white person. The very blue lives they said mattered so much, they fought them yesterday. They clashed because to these Trump true believers, American greatness, patriotism, godliness, and whiteness are synonymous with one or the other. President Barack Obama was a threat to that definition. Trump, in all his wealthy incompetence, delivered a promise to restore it. So losing an election and losing the Senate and not having the House, a triple defeat, was too big a blow. Trump's cultists, like himself, believe as they are pledging their allegiance to this country by terrorizing the Congress. In the wake of chaos and bloodshed on Capitol Hill, ever supportive of his cultic fandom, Trump tweeted, "These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home and with love and peace. Remember this day forever." So when President-elect Joe Biden said what happened yesterday does not represent what's the true America, and that we must restore democracy because we have always been about hope and decency, Joe Biden was dishonest. Only a lost country could have ever elected Donald Trump. Biden said it was a shock. Again, Biden lied to us. How? How could it be? Trump ran on the premise of empowering white supremacists. We cannot restore, dear Joe Biden, what we never had. America has never been about the greater good. It has always been about white power. Peace was a game of pretend, so long as white people felt like they sat on top of the hierarchy and remained the face of citizenship. Is everyone not weary? Are we not all tired of acting like white supremacy and brutality is a function of a few bad apples when it is the very seeds from which this country was grown? Biden was right about one thing. Enough is enough is enough. I want us to do what John Lewis asked us to do in his last dying words. Redeem the soul of our nation. We cannot attain collective liberation, build a functioning democracy, or be this beacon of hope Biden said we be until we own up to the inhumanity and white supremacy that led us to elect a terrorist as commander-in-chief. This is how ancient Rome's republic died. As a classicist, I see troubling parallels at Trump's impeachment trial as it happened 2 years agone by now. The U.S. Senate made its judgment in the impeachment trial of President Donald Trump, acquitting the president. 52 of 53 senators in the Republican majority voted to acquit the president on the abuse of power charge, and all 53 Republican senators voted to acquit on the obstruction of Congress charge. All 47 Democratic senators voted to convict the president on both charges. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah was the only Republican voting to convict for abuse of power. The Republican senators' speedy exoneration of Trump marked perhaps the most dramatic step in their capitulation to the president over the preceding 3 years to that point then. That process, as I myself spracketh on the fall before last, in what has been forever autumn ever since, recalls the ancient Roman Senate's compliance with the autocratic rule of the emperors and its transformation into a body largely reliant on the emperor's whims, along with the senatorial fealty that was again on display. there was another development that links the era of the Roman Republic's transformation into an autocratic state with the ongoing political developments in these United States today. It's a development that may point to where our empire be headed. In the paradigm that the leader is the state. Trump's attorneys argued that the president's personal position is inseparable from that of the nation itself. This is similar to the notion that took hold during the ascendancy of the man known as Rome's first emperor, Augustus, who was in power from 31 BC to Anno Domini 14, the 14th year after our Lord manifested on earth as a man. Trump defense attorney Alan Dershowitz asserted that abuse of power by the president is not an impeachable offense. A central part of Dershowitz's argument was that every public official that I know believes that his election is in the public interest, and that if a president does something which he believes will help him get elected in the public interest, that cannot be the kind of quid pro quo that results in impeachment. This inability to separate the personal interests of a leader from the interests of the country he or she leads has powerful echoes in ancient Rome. There, no formal change from a republican system to an autocratic system ever occurred. Rather, there was an erosion of the republican institutions, a steady creep over decades of authoritarian decision-making, and the consolidation of power within one individual, all with the name Republic preserved. And that was how oversight became as harassment. Much of Rome's decline into one-man rule can be observed in a series of developments during the time of Augustus, who held no formal monarchical title, but only the vague designation princeps, or first among equals. But in fact, the Senate had ceded him both power, imperium in Latin, over Rome's military and the traditional tribune's power to veto legislation. Each of these powers also granted him immunity from prosecution. He was, ergo, above the law. Augustus's position thus gave him exactly the freedom from oversight, or what Trump calls presidential harassment, that our president demands. Such immunity is also the sort that Richard Mulhouse Nixon seemed to long for, most famously in his post-presidency declaration that when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. In Augustus's time, the idea also emerged that the princeps and the Roman state were to a great extent one and the same. The identity of the one was growing to become inseparable from the identity of the other. So, for example, under Augustus and then his successor Tiberius, insults against the emperor could be considered acts of treason against the state, or, more officially, against the majesty of the Roman people. A critic of the princeps, be it in unflattering words or in the improper treatment of his image, was subject to prosecution as an enemy of the people. A physical demonstration of the emerging union of the princeps and the state itself came as in the construction of a temple of Roma and Augustus in cities across the Mediterranean region. Here the personification of the state as a goddess, Roma, and the princeps, Augustus, were closely aligned and, what is more, deified together. The message communicated by such a pairing was clear. If not quite one and the same, the princeps and the state were intimately identified, possessing a special, abiding authority through their union as if a heterosexual couple in marriage. The state being the bride of the tyrant. Many higher-ups in the Trump administration, from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to former Secretary of Energy Rick Perry to former Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, have spoken publicly of Trump as a divinely chosen figure. And Trump himself declared earlier, 2 years gone by now, "I do really believe we have God on our side." To this point, however, a temple of Lady Liberty and Donald Trump, along the lines of the Temple of Roma and Augustus, has not yet been constructed because no one dares to portray Lady Liberty's pussy being grabbed by the man beside her. But the Senate impeachment trial had already shown us how far along the identification of leader and state has moved in the Trump era. A central part of the president's impeachment defense was, as we have seen, that the personal will of the president is indistinguishable from the state and, ergo, the good of the people. So, the Republican-led Senate's endorsement of this defense cleared the path for more of the manifestations and the consequences of authoritarianism. The case of the Roman Republic's rapid slippage into an autocratic regime masquerading as a republic showed how easily that transformation could occur. But I have a solution. I am predisposed towards providing solutions, as my biological father, Adolf Hitler, was predisposed towards solutions. Some of them final solutions. I am not my father, and my solutions are not necessarily so final. But I providest solutions nonetheless. You want the answer to all these problems I've articulated? Corporate America. See, I'm a fascist. And as a fascist, I represent man corporate. Mussolini and the Italian fascism was also known as corporatism. But the corporations in fascism are subordinate to the state, unlike in capitalism, where the state be subordinate to corporations. As a fascist, my solution to a host of problems: corporate America should defund the Republican Party. Corporate America should fucking torpedo the goddamn Republican Party. There is no longer a business-friendly Republican Party. The Trump Republican cult has become a gang of kooks and criminals that can no longer be considered business-friendly. The criminal attempts to preventist Joseph Biden from taking office are really a scramble among ambitious Republicans to claim the Trump cult base as their own in future elections, and keep feeding these voters the nativist lies and reckless populist-personated elitism that earned Trump 4 years in office. Business lobbies that support Republicans today are asking for more Trumpian chaos, which could backfire as the party rampages toward extremism and marginalization. Imagine buying a stock, then learning the seller changed his mind and canceled the transaction sans consequence. Imagine running a storefront with a landlord who raised the rent whenever he felt like it, regardless of what the lease stipulated. Imagine receiving a patent for a new invention that competitors could copy anyway, cashing in on your breakthrough sans investing any of the hard work. This is the sort of chaos the Republican Party cult, once supposedly the party of business, now advocates in its effort to overturn the legitimate election of incoming President Joe Biden. When Congress counts the presidential electoral votes on the 6th of January, that we almost had preempted,
At least a dozen Republican cult senators and more than 100 Republican members of the House challenged those vote tallies in swing states that Biden won, giving him the presidency. Every state in union ran a free and fair election with no meaningful disruptions or illegalities, yet Republicans, led by a petulant President Trump, sought to overturn the results anyway because they didn't like the outcome. The rules don't matter for Republicans. American capitalism works because rules, laws, and customs dominate. Buyers and sellers in virtually every transaction knowest what to expect and have legal recourse if the other side cheats. Contracts force everybody to abide by predictable norms. There be flaws, but enforceable rules make the system better for everybody. Big firms, small businesses, workers, and consumers. Trump and his red Russell collaborationist Republican conspirators trying to overturn Biden's win are saying, just this once, let's break the rules. No biggie, but it is a biggie. These Republicans are endorsing Venezuela-style ad hocery to keep their group in power illegitimately. Markets seem to be writing off the Republican insurgency as political shenanigans that are just for show. It's way worse than that. The former Law and Order Party has morphed into a crime and disorder party that cannot be business friendly if its only priority is to retain power at any cost. This is a metastasis of the crony capitalism Trump has practiced for the last 4 years. It rewards only those on the winning side, whilst punishing those who play by the rules. The many businesses that keep politicians in power by funding their campaigns must stop donating to any candidate who does not overtly support the rule of law in business and politics both. So, here be a starter list of the 12 seditious senators who want to overturn Biden's election, along with some of the top corporate donors for each, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. There be no simple list of corporate donors to politicians because companies donate to both campaign committees and political action committees, or PACs, PACs, that campaign on behalf of a favored politician. And some dark money donations aren't even public. My list represents a combination of corporate donations to PACs, political action committees, PACs, and companies with the employees who donated the most to each candidate. Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, top donors, HCA, Southwest Family of Companies, FedEx, AT&T, and Comcast. Mike Braun of Indiana, financed by Jasper Engines and Transmissions, Ray's Holdings, Alliance Coal, Eli Lilly, and Wabash Valley Produce. Ted Cruz of Texas, funded by Wood Forest National Bank, Lockheed Martin, Berkshire Hathaway, Sullivan and Cromwell, Delta Airlines, Insperity, and Stewart Title Guarantee. Stephen Daines of Montana, funded by Charter Communications, Langless and Associates, Amgen, Microsoft, Berkshire Hathaway, FedEx, and United Parcel Service, or UPS. Josh Hawley of Missouri, funded by Diamond Pet Foods, Emerson Electric, Herzog Contracting, Hunter Engineering, Charles Schwab Corporation, Edward Jones, and Alliance Coal. Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, funded by Northwestern Mutual, Foley and Lardner, Koch Industries, ABC Supply, Honeywell, AT&T Genmar Corp., and Elliott Management, as well as CSX, John Kennedy of Louisiana, funded by Acadian Ambulance Service, ATCO Investment, Morrison-Dixon, Amway/Altacor, Central Management, and Ochsner Health System. James Lankford of Oklahoma, funded by Koch Industries, Blue Cross/Blue Shield, Honeywell, Cox Enterprises, Ernst & Young, Devon Energy, United Parcel Service or UPS, and Berkshire Hathaway. Bill Haggerty of Tennessee, funded by Rogers Group, Apollo Global Management, FedEx, HCA, Cerberus Capital Management, Hall Capital and International Paper. Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, funded by Sinclair Companies. The San Francisco Giants, the baseball team of my Golden Gate, and Occidental Petroleum, as well as ExxonMobil and Pinnacle West Capital. Roger Marshall of Kansas, funded by Burns and McDonnell, Nuterra Capital, Poet, LLC, a limited liability company, Watco Companies, Bucati Companies, Goldman Sachs, Spirit Aerosystems, and Bristol Myers Squibb. Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, funded by Hometown Lenders, Drummond Company, Wellborn Cabinet, Collagio Enterprises, and ProShot Concrete. Trump Confederate co-conspirators in the House say as many as 140 Republicans joined those 12 seditious senators to subvert Biden's blue victory. There's no full list of the plotters, not yet, but 106 House Republicans signed on to a doomed Texas lawsuit that tried to overturn Biden's victory in December and failed. That's likely the core group. Identify them. The Red Russell collaborationist Republican insurgency on our shores is definitively not the business-friendly party anymore. Republicans were not able to prevent Biden from taking office, since Democrats control the House and obviously would never block the electoral vote counting, so corporate donors might think they should just hold their noses until the whole mess blows over. It's probably worth supporting the Republicans' low-tax, deregulatory agenda, even if it means overlooking a few cranks in the party, right? That view deserves rethinking. A complete and total rethink, like a complete and total recall. The Trump Republican cult did cut taxes and regulations, but it did so in a partisan manner that was fiscally unsustainable and, in all likelihood, quite temporary. Trump himself, meanwhile, kneecapped free trade and declared war on companies he held personal vendettas against, such as Amazon, Time Warner, Facebook, and Harley-Davidson. Out of spite, Trump wrecked the United States Postal Service, which many small businesses rely on for their very lives. There is no longer a business-friendly Republican Party. The criminal attempts to prevent Biden from taking office are really a scramble among ambitious Republicans to claim the Trump cult base as their own in future elections and keep feeding these voters the nativist lies and reckless populism that earned Trump 4 years in office. Business lobbies that support Republicans today are asking for more Trumpian chaos, which will backfire as the party rampages toward extremism and peripheralization. The Democratic Party is not a comfortable home for corporate interests either, though a stable Biden administration will be better for business than Trumpian turmoil. with the Republican Party devolving into a gang of kooks and hoodlums, it'd be high time to draft whatever honest and ethical Republicans be left into a new party that can claim the rational middle and reinforce the rules of democracy. It cannot possibly be worse than what the Republican Party cult offers now. Finally, Trump and the Republican Party cult lost Georgia. Black voters won it. A final push from the president in Dalton, and the tale be told by turnout. Georgia's Senate. The results of Georgia's Senate race. Georgia's Senate results mark a sea change in American politics. The pandemic makes all the celebrations hushed and a little strange, including political victory speeches. But a little after 12:30 a.m., past midnight, yesterday, basically this morning, the Right Reverend Raphael Warnock, the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church and presumptive senator from Georgia, flickered onto a live stream, sitting alone in a small office, and over his left shoulder was a cross. Over his right shoulder was a copy of Barack Obama's book entitled The Audacity of Hope. John Ossoff, the other Democrat in Georgia's twin runoffs for the Senate, was busy at the time unseating Senator David Perdue. And this morning, we could thank the God in heaven above for delivering us from evil. Both Democrats won, and they gave us the Blue Party, improbably, control of the United States Senate this month, and President-elect Joe Biden a much better shot at passing meaningful legislation. Warnock was reading from a prepared speech, at times a little jerkily, but he had a conversational tone and an easy grin. He barely mentioned the stakes of this election for Democratic policy goals, focusing instead on his own biography. Warnock is the 11th of 12 children, was raised in a Savannah housing project, and now is the pastor of the church in Atlanta where the Right Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. served as pastor, and John Lewis once prayed. Warnock spracketh of his mother, saying, "The other day, because this is America, the 82-year-old hands that used to pick somebody else's cotton went to the polls and picked her youngest son to be a United States Senator." All kinds of historical loops were closing in Georgia the night before last. There were long ones, like those that Warnock mentioned. He will be only the 11th black senator in American history, and the first black Democrat to be elected to the Senate from the South. His victory and Ossoff's own were both powered by very high turnout among African American voters and comparatively low turnout among the rural white voters on whom the Republicans have increasingly come to rely. But there were shorter loops as well. Almost exactly 6 years ago, Mitch McConnell became the majority leader of the Senate, and ever since, politics in Washington has been in what was starting to seem like a permanent state of stagnation. McConnell operated as a handbrake on Washington, and Washington as a handbrake on the country, until it was hard to separate the political condition from the national one. Problems festered. Scant legislation passed. Nothing ever seemed to change. Republicans fought eternally to manage their own extremists, never successfully, whilst deepening their institutional control of the judiciary most of all. The progressive certainty that the arc of history was bending only strengthened. But Democrats continued narrowly losing all of the most important votes. Everything kept coming down to a coin flip, but the coin always flipped the same way. The story has been similar in Georgia. Before this week, there had been 8 statewide runoffs since 1992, and Republicans had won all 8. The Atlanta region kept growing and becoming more progressive, but the state never quite turned. Even as Biden beat Donald Trump by 11,779 votes in the state on November 3rd, there were heartening signs for McConnell. In both Senate races, the Republicans got more votes than the Democrats, though neither Perdue nor Loeffler reached the majority that would have averted the day before yesterday's runoff. What happened between November 3rd and the 5th of this month? Well, just about everything. President Trump relentlessly, but ineffectively, attempted to bully Republican state officials into finding some grounds to overturn Georgia's results in the presidential election, and some of his supporters issued death threats against those state Republican officials. Both Perdue and Loeffler were investigated for insider trading. They had sold off millions of dollars in stock after having received early briefings about the likely extent of the coronavirus pandemic. Loeffler's campaign was accused of artificially darkening Warnock's skin in some of the ads it ran. The very same tactics and compromises that have defined McConnell's Republican Party, the cynical relationship with Trump, the comfort with defending the prerogatives of the rich, the weaponization of race itself, all backfired in Georgia. The margins were narrow again, but the conditions were different. This time, the coin flipped the other way. If the Senate elections in Georgia constituted the first political event after Biden's election, then they still seemed to belong very much to the Trump era. The lame duck president's efforts to overturn his own losses dominated the news throughout the runoff campaigns. Despite having so much at stake in the runoffs, Biden himself was a curiously intermittent presence in Georgia. He did arrive in Atlanta on Monday to hold an outdoor rally where he sounded upbeat, promised healing, and seemed to belong to an entirely different time in American life than the one playing on the cable networks, in which Republican senators were promising to contest the certification of the election yesterday, despite having no evidence of fraud, and extremists were gathering in Washington for a pro-Trump rally that turned into a riot. As votes were being counted in Georgia, some of those protesters were filmed fighting in District of Columbia with a line of riot police. Biden's light presence was just as well. It let the focus drift elsewhere, to the long efforts of activists to organize the progressive vote in Georgia. A headline in the Times, printed just after midnight, ran, "The 10-year Stacey Abrams project to flip Georgia has nearly come to fruition." At about 1:30 a.m., with both races still uncalled, and Atlanta's vote belatedly coming in, Ossoff took a very narrow lead over Perdue. Warnock's race was called around 2 a.m. The handbrakes were off. The McConnell era seemed to be ending. Twice in Georgia, first in the presidential race, and now in the Senate runoffs, coming yesterday, led by the ambitious reactionary senators, conservative, personated reactionary senators, Josh Hawley of Missouri and Ted Cruz of Texas, suggest that Trump cultism may flourish. The QAnon-influenced paranoia among conservative, personated reactionary media and the street demonstrations today of "Stop the Steal" suggest it may further darken The Democratic Party's path, too, is defined by tensions that are at least as generational as they be ideological, and which were present in Georgia. If the Right Reverend Warnock represents the party as it sees itself, then Ossoff, 33 years old, hyperactive on social media, with more family money than professional achievement behind him, embodies the Democratic Party as the Republicans see it. Neither Ossoff nor Warnock has ever held never held elected office. Politically, each remains, like Biden's party, a little undefined. Ossoff didn't speak in the early hours of Wednesday. His margins were smaller, so his campaign manager issued a press release expressing confidence that the vote would go as the candidate's way, leaving the stage to Warnock. Even the rough edges of Warnock's speech, as he looked down to remember his text and then grinned up to recite it, contained some glimmer of hope. Politics has been stuck in the same place for so very long. Here at last were two new faces to bring us into the new year. Now, this has been a struggle for myself to merely even bring you such analysis. Mein Kampf, my struggle, be thine own. Now, I'm told that we had a successful reconnection, which means that we must have been off. I'd like to hear from my listeners in the chat if that happened. Were we knocked off and you were unable to hear myself?
It was for a few seconds.
Oh, God, what did we miss? What did I say that people weren't able to hear? Do you know? Or was it just inconsequential?
What happened was you were speaking, and then all of a sudden you just stopped speaking from what I heard, and then you just started, and then it sounded like you were coming back in again. So I think whatever happened via the connection, your connection might have been severed.
Okay, all right. So Le Renee Encounter says, yes, it was cut off for a few seconds. Was there, you apparently didn't get any glitch in the coherency of
No,
what...
I didn't.
Okay.
There was no glitch in the live stream either, so I'm assuming that you might have to contact Comcast again.
Okay.
So,
Okay. And Daniel Arola says, didn't really miss much during the slight interruption. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much. And thank you, Jameson. And thank you, Le Renee. She said, small glitch. Okay, bless you both. Bless you all three of you. God bless you all. Okay. Again, just to kind of wrap this up, my struggle be thine own. Contribute to the struggle at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich and indicate myself as friend or relation in order to prevent PayPal from taking its bloody cut. Where we now be accepting contributions via PayPal Holdings Incorporated at DouglasDietrich.com. And in all due acknowledgement unto our own personal hero, who we asketh of everyone moral and or fiscal support, on behalf of our dearest English brother in battle, John Henry McMills Warrington. Friend and follow he via his Facebook Incorporated timeline at facebook.com/John.War. And subscribe to his YouTube maggot channel at youtube.com/C/Magator, which be spelled MAGGOTAUR, he being the property manager thereof, who be the Team Thrax Dietrichs or Dragons ultimate post-episodic producer, and our final productions archivist at DouglasDietrich.com. For word no for he, nigh all videographic works of the internationally recognized renegade military historian would have been lost. So, if financial aid no be prohibitive per budgetary constraints, electronically relay monetary assistance via PayPal, where you can donate to the Maggot Man, aka John Warrington, by clicking send on your PayPal account page and then entering his email address, John_war@hotmail.com, and you can PayPal him at paypal.me/Magator, which be spelled MAGGOTAUR. He was the man who, of his own initiative, downloaded the majority of what I've published on YouTube into his own personal hard drive so that we could reconstruct my legacy online after it was scrubbed therefrom no less than thrice. That's 3 times. And in doing so, he acted as the bridge between the Akashic records and the data matrix of our material world. And in that sense, as a virtual personality interacting with yourselves within that, realm of Malkuthian or worldly dimensional information. He is my creator. And now you too can do your part to help in the fight against total annihilation. Take it upon yourselves to spread the word about Douglas Dietrich, that he, the biological son of Adolphus Jacob Hitler, which you can find out more about at douglasdietrich.com/2019/05/08/Douglas Dietrich, son of Adolf Hitler, fighting against white supremacist neo-Nazis. Confer while there a footnote on my bio, sire, on the homepage of showsdd.com, where you can find out the meaning of my biological father's name, the name what made the man. Well, take it upon yourself, after educating and informing and enlightening yourself thereby, to spread the word far and wide to all and sundry that the scion of Adolf Hitler, Douglas Dietrich, be alive and well and resident in the city and county of San Francisco, and, of course, if at all possible, encourage all those you enlighten and educate to electronically relay their contributions at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich, indicating myself as friend or relation in order to prevent or preempt PayPal from taking its pound of flesh from their contributions. People are forever asking myself, well, Renegatus Humanus Arma Ab Masa Erudicio, the renegade human weapon of mass instruction, what they can do to fight the pedopathophilocracy, such being our present Slavo-Western government by patriarchy of pathological pedophiles. You can all help spread awareness by supporting myself. We have a new contribution page on douglasdietrich.com where you can make a donation online using either the credit or debit card. If it is distasteful to indicate myself as either friend or relation of our extended, via our extended electronic family, then take it upon yourself to go to douglasdietrich.com and press the red donate button, where you'll find the opportunity to make a donation online using either the credit or debit card without needing to indicate myself as anything, and having no middleman takest money from your contribution. Simply go us to douglasdietrich.com and hit that red donate button. Otherwise, when you hit PayPal via the yellow donate button, indicate myself as friend or relation, for we're all friends here, or you wouldn't be supporting myself, and we're certainly all members of our extended electronic family. And, of course, while you're there, reward yourself by using the yellow donate button to take yourself to the homepage of showsdd.com, where you can register and log in to all of our archives on douglasdietrich.com to access all of our past episodes. Because all sponsors will be granted exclusive electronic access to both my videographic and audio recorded archives through to this year, from the 2011th year in our Lord, the very year mine own late and sainted matriarch, the Grandma Dame Diana Lin Sujin Takabayashi Hideko Dietrich, was murdered, assassinated, nigh immediately aftermath Sanjuichi Senseme, the 3/11 terror attack against the Fukushima Daiichi, our Big One cluster of nuclear power plant facilities on site, the 7,000 isles of the Greater Japanese Empire, when 'twas deemed by much Native American cosmological reckoning that the first rays of the dawning of the sixth world broke upon us, and magics could again be worked conjointly with Mother Earth to redeem the folk upon her. They're not on YouTube anymore, whereon the intra-global crises analyst Douglas Dwayne Dietrich long ago established his high-profile visibility platform per rationale of personal security by way of public promotion. Only on contribution will thy membership be processed within 48 through 72 hours, between 2 to 3 days, for full access, electronic access to all mine archives, meaning all those videos that John Warrington saved, aside those on the Maggot Douglas Dietrich channel and the YouTube channel named Taboo Bros 2, spelled TABOO space BROS space Roman numeral 2, as managed by the mixed martial arts maestro Daniel Arola, whom you can visit at facebook.com/Daniel.Arola.3. of Damage, D-A-M-A-G, Daniel Arola Martial Arts Group, Incorporated, Cali Combatives. Optionally, mail either checks or money orders, never cash, to the personal residential address of the Mr. Douglas Dietrich, which itself be listed on douglasdietrich.com/donate-2, the most important thing being that people regularly donate what they can within their means. Foremost among Axis Daddy D's donors, aside his mistress and manager, Selena Khan, and our former web mistress, Lena Shea, whom you can subscribe to her YouTube channel at Lena Crane. Be our most beloved greater British brother in battle, the Team Thrax, Dietrich's or Dragons heavyweight lifting keeper of the spirits, and YouTube Bizarre HD channel managing mixologist, George Edward Knight, whom you can friend and follow at facebook.com/george.e.knight.7, who himself manages the YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/bizarre HD, which itself be spelled BIZAREHD. Subscribe. He being mine own personal hero, who has substantially delivered towards my salvation from the streets, and whose self-produced videos entitled How the United States Won World War I and Why We Are Still Legally at War with the Third Reich both be factually substantiated per mine own expositions. And of course, you can find on his channel trailered the video under production now known as, entitled The 1,000-Year Reich in Exile, subtitled The Third Reich's Flügelrad and Hanabu Technology. Indeed, the last Dietrich Gluvias, son of Dietrich, sir, son of the dragons, that name being Anglo-corrupted as Dracula's, expositions via YouTube would not be possible sans generous benefactions from my listeners on a monthly basis. The Amerasian agent of the Peacock Angel, Tavil Shmeliak, be the only person on the surface of this world with the insider knowledge and experience necessary to lead thy resistance against the Russo-sub-satanic occupation and anti-godly insurgency, it bearing no end of emphasis that Judy, Anglo-corrupted as Jedi, literally Master D, or the Master of Enlightenment myself, is not paid to articulate mine expositions, and have never once been remunerated for my services rendered unto thyself and all thy holdest dear at incomparable sacrifices to myself. Most tragically of all mine loved ones, in my most singular and quite unenviable role as the ultimate public informant at personal risk, still at large, your taxation cannot support myself as I be denied access to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs benefits and or services due dishonorable discharge. So again, go to paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich and enter mine remunerative compensation. The very survival of the human species be at stake, and I am not exaggerating. Do not wait. Donate now. It be appreciated beyond my ability to express in any language. As well, forget not to subscribe to the Douglas Dietrich YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich and click that notification bell in order to receive notifications that live streams have started. Even if you be subscribed, you will only receive notifications if you select all in notifications. To reemphasize, subscribe to the Douglas Dietrich YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich and tune in at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Wednesday and Sunday night. And click that notification bell in order to receive notifications that live streams has started. Finally, most importantly, above and beyond all else, subscribe and support at douglasdietrich.com and donate at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich, indicating myself a friend or relation. We're all friends here, and we're extended electronic family, to thereby preempt PayPal taking its blood cut and discombobulating your beautiful contribution. Sponsors will be granted exclusive access to the online archives, including all video and MP3 recordings of Douglas Dietrich from 2011 through to the present by your using the yellow donate button to access the showsdd.com homepage. Well, the the homepage is the showsdd.com, where you will be able to register and log in thenceforward, rewarding yourself for your contribution by accessing all our archival records that exist on douglasdietrich.com. My love be unto all who provide us my self-support. Gonna check in with the live stream, go through some of the contributions people have entered. Le Renee Encounter says, yes, Douglas has so much stamina. James and Reese says, Douglas is incredible. Le Renee Encounter says, wow, have you been up all these hours? You are amazing. Thank you, honey. It's, my biological father, Hitler, could talk for hours and hours throughout the night, too. That's a historical fact. It's in the genes. Peter Mott was referencing some traitors. Faustina E. said police were caught bringing in Antifa. Hope I spelled that right. Thank you. And Peter was saying woot. Daniel was saying yesterday's riot in D.C. was a Sesame Street version of the coup that took place in the Philippines that led President Ferdinand Marcos into exile in Hawaii back in the 1980s. We can say that Ferdinand Marcos was one of those few heroes that was able to at least go off into the sunset. So at least he had that. At least he could die in Hawaii, which, hell, if I had to die, I'd like to die in Hawaii. At any rate, Bizarre HD, who's our man, George Knight, proud father of a beautifully, beautiful little Aryan angel in England. He says, much love, Douglas, and my heart's in return. Daniel Arola says, Senator Lindsey Graham sounded and appeared drunk when he finally declared for Joe Biden last night. Well, there you go. Congress stayed up to 3:41 a.m. their time. Mike Pence acknowledged the electoral results for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris after finally rejecting the objections. Yeah, they still filed after the mob. Well, those fuckers deserve to die. Their people were going to execute hostages on the fucking National Mall. Let's execute them instead. Alright, that's where we're at. This is war. And we have to win, or they won't let us live. At any rate, my love be unto all who support myself. And with that, we'll see you all again on Sunday night at eventide. My best to Le Renee, and my best be unto the lovely Katharina Love, and to both of you. All right, you take care for now. Ending live stream.